Chapter 733. Rumble. Rumble. The warship slowly moved. The formation on the undercarriage spun, releasing immense energy to push the warship forward. As it glided through the void, it created a huge commotion. This was the Heavenly Spring Holy Lands Expedition warship, the top warship in the Hidden Dragon continent. The formation on it was carved by a formation master, which had endless functions and magical effects. It could even travel through the void, which was comparable to the Almighty Expert. If it were to travel through the void, it would consume a lot of energy. If it wasn't under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be used. However, the old man couldn't wait any longer. Thus, he directly ordered his men to use the space travel ability to reach the Valley of Gluttony as soon as possible to complete the task that Amethyst Elder had given him and take the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. Amethyst Elder said that this time, the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance competition wasn't limited to just the Heavenly Spring Holy Land. The other Holy Lands had long been restless. This made the old man even more regretful. Why didn't he join hands with Golden Saber to capture that old man Chu Chongsheng? If he had captured him, there wouldn't have been so many messy things. However, since it had happened, it was useless to regret. The most important thing now was to take the inheritance. They couldn't let it fall into the hands of the other Holy Lands. Activate the space travel. Our target is the Valley of Gluttony. The old man stood on the bow, his stern voice echoing throughout the entire warship. A moment later, the warship rumbled. Many formations on the ship sparkled with dazzling light. That light was so dazzling that people couldn't help but shed tears. Buzz, a terrifying wave of energy expanded, as if it wanted to tear a big hole in the void. On the warship, a gust of wind blew, causing everyone's hair to flutter. Saint Daughter Ziyun's light blue eyes were filled with curiosity. Looking at the warship's transformation, she suddenly felt a little excited. The 100th attempt to escape had finally succeeded. Rumble. However, in the next moment, a white silhouette suddenly appeared in the direction of the 5-colored mountain range that was already far away. It was extremely fast, and like a ray of light, it sped towards the warship at a rapid speed. Ziyun instantly sensed the light shadow. She jumped up from her spot. "Hurry! Hurry up!" screamed Ziyun. She was too familiar with that glowing silhouette. Basically, she had been captured by that glowing silhouette every single time. Now, whenever she saw that glowing silhouette, she would feel fear in her heart. She wanted to get rid of this light figure, but it was a clone of her father, Amethyst Elder. It was here to capture her. "Saintess, we can't rush through the void." The expression on the old man's face trembled slightly as he said solemnly. Ziyun snorted angrily. She could tell that the old man was plotting against her. He turned his head to look at the clone that was chasing after him like a deity. Saint Ziyun's eyes flashed with anger. Then, she raised her hand, grabbed the old man's beard, and pulled it. The old man was dumbfounded. "Smelly old man, I will remember the debt of you scheming against this saintess today. When this young lady returns, I'll definitely pull out all your beard." Saintess Ziyun threatened. The old man was taken aback. A moment later, he saw Saint Ziyun raise her long legs, stepping on the deck of the warship. Her long legs were as straight as a spring. A moment later, she stretched her legs, and her body shot out, jumping into the twisting void crack. That was the spot where the warship was supposed to travel through the void. The old man's face changed instantly. In the distance, the glowing silhouette soared through the air, its aura surging. Then, it barged into the formation. The old man's face paled. "The void passage isn't finished yet. Saintess, you want to get in there? What if the brutal energy tore it apart?" Thinking about that, the old man paled even more. After shaking a few times, the void crack completely stabilized, no longer trembling. The old man exhaled a long breath. Swish! The void suddenly split open. A figure fell from the void, his purple hair fluttering in the wind. Hades' era had dark circles under his eyes. His arms drooped as he walked feebly. He felt empty, lonely, and cold. He needed spicy strip. He needed a lot of them. At this moment, he just wanted to hold them, eat them, and lick them. All of a sudden, his mind flickered. He lazily lifted his handsome face. In the void, a figure fell rapidly, growing bigger and bigger. Was someone about to fall? Hades was bewildered. Then, he reached out to support that figure. Boom! A loud thud echoed. Hades listlessly looked at the deep hole in front of him, then at his empty hands. He awkwardly rubbed his head. He didn't do it on purpose. He just felt dizzy because he didn't have any spicy strip. A figure crawled out of the hole. His face was covered in dust, and his purple hair was disheveled. Saint Daughter Ziyun crawled out of the hole. Her bones felt like they were about to fall apart. She lifted her head and saw Hades' era. That handsome face, Saint Daughter Ziyun was bewildered. His pitch-black, gloomy eyes had a depth that could make people sink into it. At that moment, Saint Daughter Ziyun sank into it. You're the wind and I'm the sand. Crazy to the end of the world. How could there be such a wonderful person in this world? Valley of Gluttony. The Glutton Gods Building Square was in an uproar. Everybody was frightened, looking at the radiant dish in the middle of the square. It was like a secret treasure was slowly unveiling its mysterious veil in front of them. Was it really a dish? Many people were puzzled and extremely surprised. Some were amazed and some were excited. The light they saw from the projection formation had amazed them. The moment Bufang lifted the iron lid, the torrential aroma expanded like ripples. After each ripple, the aroma became thicker, hitting people's taste buds. Smells so good. I'm drooling. I can't control myself just by smelling this aroma. This dish. It's poisonous. After a moment of silence, the diners burst into earth-shaking clamor. Sizzle! 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 The white smoke slowly dispersed. Chu Chongqing and the others focused their eyes, looking at the dish on the porcelain plate. The light gradually receded. In the next moment, the steaming hot dish revealed its true appearance. It was a crystal-clear steak. Steam and aroma twirled around the steak. Faint smoke rose and shrouded it. The colors of the side dishes were bright, beautiful, and lifelike. Even after being braised and stir-fried by Bufang, they still looked so vivid. The bright color of the dish set off the beauty of the steak, which moved many people's hearts. A sense of nobility seemed to wash over him. That dish was so arrogant, which made them exclaim in admiration. Meat Demon Beast's face froze. His eyes became blurry and his mouth dropped. The raw steak in his hand almost fell to the ground. He gasped in admiration. He couldn't believe it. He shuddered. How could there be such a perfect piece of meat in this world? The stripes, the color, the spirit energy, and the aroma it emitted. Meat Demon Harry was almost intoxicated by it. He was obsessed with meat, but it was the first time he had seen such a noble and beautiful piece of meat. He knew he had lost. Even if his cooking ingredient was a spirit beast at the divine soul realm, compared to this piece of meat, it was still dim. The two of them couldn't be compared. The others were also shocked. Bufang's secret 7-well Taotai steak. Wait a minute. Taotai meat? His. People seemed to remember something. Their faces were filled with astonishment. They couldn't believe it. Taotai meat. How could this kid Bufang have something as noble as Taotai meat? Daggers were distributed one by one. Chu Chongqing gave Bufang a deep look. Deep in his eyes, he felt a twinge of pain. Who knew that this kid would take out a cheating tool like Taotai meat? If he didn't have the meat of a divine spirit realm spirit beast, how could he compete with that piece of meat? However, no matter what, Chu Chongqing was still looking forward to Taotai meat. Moreover, it was a dish that was so beautiful that it looked like a piece of art. Holding the dagger, Chu Chongqing walked to the Taotai steak. Holding the dagger, he slowly cut it. Sizzle! Sizzle! As soon as the dagger touched the steak, the oil inside the steak splashed, bringing with it a nice wine aroma. That wine aroma could make people intoxicated. He cut a piece of toutai meat. Although it wasn't easy to cut the meat, it was so fragrant. The aroma from the meat fascinated him. He put some side dishes on the toutai meat. Then, the dagger pierced through the meat, lifting it up and shoving it into his mouth. The oil dripped, and the aroma diffused everywhere. The aroma stirred up Chu Chongqing's pores, making him shiver. As soon as the meat entered his mouth, the soft and tender texture exploded in an instant. The medium-well steak had a very good texture. When he bit down, he felt a little chewy and full of fragrance. The skin was a little crispy, but the toutai meat inside was so tender and fragrant. The others also used their daggers to cut a piece of meat. As soon as the meat entered their mouths, everybody was shaken. Yen Yu felt as if he was facing an earth-shaking toutai spirit beast. His entire body shivered, and his face was filled with awe. In his head, there was a handsome toutai roaring. Its mouth was like a black hole that could swallow everything. When Mu Qing swallowed the meat, her face had already turned red. The fragrance assaulted her, and her entire body felt a little hot. She closed her legs and rubbed them against each other. Her breathing became a little heavy. She closed her eyes, feeling the sensation of the taoyu's meat filling her mouth. In the next instant, with a gulp, she swallowed it down. It was as if a ball of steaming hot energy was pouring into her body, causing her aura to fluctuate. Opening her eyes, Mu Qing looked at Bufang, her face stern. No doubt, he was a formidable enemy. She had put away her disdain. Facing an opponent who could cook such a dish, she had to be stern. While tasting the food, everybody became silent. Chu Chongqing's clothes had burst, revealing his muscular upper body. Facing the toutai meat, he couldn't control his urge to burst his clothes. Alright, everybody has tasted the food. Now let's judge. Who will be the winner of this chef's challenge? Chu Chongqing's muscles bulged as he asked with a stern face. As soon as these words left his mouth, the atmosphere became solemn and austere. The judges exchanged looks. Chu Chongqing's face was dark and gloomy. Bufang stood calmly, clasping his hands. The wind blew the hem of his vermilion robe, making it flutter. The entire place fell into a strange silence. After a long time, Meat Demon King's voice trembled. He took a step back, sitting on the ground. The fat on his face shivered, looking begrudging. I lost this match. Chapter 734. His eyes were deep and melancholy. His pitch-black eyes were like the starry sky, with longing and longing. When Saint Daughter Ziyun met his eyes, she felt as if she had been electrocuted. It was like an electric current was running around her body, making her feel numb and soft. His long, pitch-black hair brushed past his face, making him look handsome and charismatic. Even that lazy and dispirited aura and the dark circles under his eyes made him look so cute and alluring. You! Saint Daughter Ziyun's red lips parted slightly, and a blush crept up her cheeks. Her slightly bashful face became a little blurred. Hades's eyes were half opened. He looked like he hadn't woken up yet. The dark circles under his eyes expanded. He looked so exhausted. If Bufang saw Hades' era's appearance, he would be astounded. He would think that Brother Sharp from Earth had traveled to another world. Are you okay? One must not randomly shuttling through the void. If one is careless, one will be sliced into pieces by the violent space. Even one's soul will be helpless and lonely as it drifts within the boundless space. Hades said lazily. Since he didn't have spicy strips, he didn't have any energy. Saint Daughter Ziyun bit her lower lip, her eyes blurry. So charming. Does he care about me? He knows that I've traveled through the void to get here. So awesome. You. Saint Daughter Ziyun opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. Sigh. Too bad you're not a spicy strip. If you were a spicy strip, it would be great. A spicy strip falling from the sky. Just thinking about it makes me excited. The Nether King raised his hand and covered his face with it. His black hair fell down, seeping through the gaps between his fingers and spreading out. This movement, Saint Daughter Ziyun was bewildered. He was pure and unpretentious. He was much more handsome than the heavenly springs Saint Sun. Young people these days, don't kill yourself. Life is precious, but the spicy strip is more valuable. Follow I. After you taste the spicy strip, you will understand the true meaning of life. The Nether King let out a sigh and said, "Okay. I'll go with you." Saint Daughter Ziyun's eyes lit up when she heard the Nether King's words. She climbed out of the pit and stood straight in front of the Nether King with a flushed face. Hades was stunned. This young man agreed a little too quickly. Suddenly, an oppressive rumble came from the sky. A terrifying aura spread out in the sky, and the energy waves spread out in all directions. Hades' era was stunned. He tried his best to open his eyes, which were surrounded by dark circles, and looked up at the sky. There, a white figure stepped through the air, and a terrifying aura spread out. The excitement on Saint Daughter Ziyun's face immediately disappeared and was replaced by a worried expression. "Hurry up and leave. He will kill you," Saint Daughter Ziyun said helplessly. She thought that she had gotten rid of her father, but she didn't expect that her father would still be able to get her. Her 100th attempt to escape failed again. It was a pity for the person in front of him. She couldn't let her father kill him. She hurried to call Hades, asking him to leave. Otherwise, once the light figure locked on him, this handsome young man would be slapped to death. It was not easy for her to meet a handsome young man. She couldn't let him be killed like that. Although she couldn't bear to do that, but Hades era yawned, scratching his messy hair as he asked calmly, "Is he here for you?" Well, you'd better leave now. He'll kill you." Holy Daughter Ziyun's expression changed as she heaved a sigh. "Oh, it seems you don't want to go with him? Then you should go with I." The Nether King stroked his hair as the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a charming smile. Saint Daughter Ziyun was bewildered. What did he mean? A moment later, she saw Hades's movement. She dropped her jaw in disbelief. Hades era raised his hand weakly, pointing at the light figure in the sky. He said, "Buddy up there, listen to me. I will protect this young man." The light figure slowly approached. Its terrifying aura was gathering, and the entire sky seemed to turn white. The light figure illuminated the entire sky. The light figure cocked its head. It seemed to have invisible eyes watching Hades. "Is this guy a fool?" The light figure thought indifferently. A moment later, the light figure stepped out. Thousands of beams of energy gathered, turning into a giant foot that covered the sky. The foot phantom was so huge. Terrifying energy rumbled, pouring down. It wanted to stomp Hades to death. It was like killing an ant. Ziyun's face paled in just a blink of an eye. Waves of air blew against the Nether King's hair, causing it to flutter in the wind. Without spicy strips, this king's mood is very bad. Nether King Erha sighed. His eyes, which had dark circles, were incomparably deep. The next moment, a flat slap flew out. Inside the massive sacrificial altar in the 5-colored mountain range, Amethyst Elder's originally tightly shut eyes suddenly opened, and the image of a strange spirit bird seemed to appear in his eyes. The clone I sent to bring Yunner back was smashed. Who did it after all? Is it some ignorant old men from the other Holy Lands? Damn. Seems like they're going to do something big? We have to speed up the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. I lost. Meat Demon Harry slumped his butt on the ground. He sighed, reluctantly admitting his defeat. It wasn't Chu Chongqing who announced it, and the judges hadn't announced it yet. However, everybody kept silent because it was exactly as Meat Demon Harry had analyzed. Meat Demon Harry had lost. Initially, people thought that Meat Demon Harry would surely win if he used a spirit beast at the Divine Soul Realm with a 3-step soul ladder. Who would have thought that this kid would take out a portion of Tautai meat? It was King Tautai meat, the meat of an almighty spirit beast at the peak of Divine Soul Realm. Everybody couldn't help but grumble inwardly today. The top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony didn't dare to look down on Bufang anymore. Meat Demon Harry was defeated in his specialty. Of course, they felt a sense of danger. Although that kid had won because of his overwhelming ingredient, it seemed they had to decide the ingredients in the next chef's challenge. Otherwise, if that kid took out another heaven-defying ingredient, they wouldn't be able to compete anymore. Bufang indifferently looked at Meat Demon Harry. Light flickered beneath his feet, and a gust of wind blew past, causing his hair to flutter. Crystal knife cabinet floated out from the formation on the ground. The kitchen knife in the cabinet sparkled with dazzling radiance. This chef's challenge is over. The winner is Bufang. Chu Chongqing strenuously announced the decision. The muscles on his face twitched. He suddenly felt a sense of danger because he felt that Bufang could challenge all the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Then no way. Chu Chongqing's eyes became sharp instantly. He couldn't let Bufang continue to win. Xiaoya had to stay in the Valley of Gluttony. The Valley of Gluttony's inheritance needed her. Chu Chongqing's heart was palpitating because he could feel a strong danger approaching. That danger made his hair stand on end. He had to find a way to kill Bufang in the chef's challenge. Meat Demon Harry was bewildered. It was the first time he tasted defeat in a chef's challenge. The fat on his body shivered, and tears rolled down his cheeks. He was heartbroken. It was the first time he lost, and it was hard to bear. What was worse was that his kitchen knife was going to be taken away. Before, he had always taken people's kitchen knives. Today, his knife was taken away. It was too cruel. I can't stand this injustice. Meat Demon Harry's eyes were filled with tears, and the fat on his face shivered. However, Bufang didn't mind him. His hand shook. Instantly, Meat Demon Harry's big kitchen knife flew into his hand. This knife was big and heavy, but it was easy for Bufang to hold it. It wasn't a famous knife, but its spirit wasn't weak. Apparently, Meat Demon Harry had taken good care of it. After playing with the knife for a while, Bufang put it back into the cabinet. The moment Meat Demon Harry saw the cabinet close, he seemed to hear the sound of his heart breaking. It was really hard to bear. At this moment, everybody quieted down. Their breathing became heavy, and their eyes widened as they couldn't believe what they had just seen. How could he lose? Although that little chef's dish was so gorgeous that it made people gasp in admiration, and his dish could glow. Anyway, Meat Demon Harry was ranked 5th on the Tablet of Gluttony. How could he lose like that? They didn't know if they should be happy or sad at this moment. This time, the Valley of Gluttony was slapped in the face. They were defeated in consecutive chef's challenges. Meat Demon Harry didn't feel sad for a long time. He got up from the floor, wiped his tears, and sniffled. Then, he gave Bufang a deep look. This chef's challenge was merciful. They just took his knife, but they didn't deprive him of his right to cook. It gave him a chance to win his knife back. I won't give up like this, Meat Demon Harry said. He took out a piece of raw meat, chewed it, then turned around and left. Before he left, he grabbed the giant spirit beast and carried it away. Looking at Meat Demon Harry's back as he left, the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony had a complicated look in their eyes. When Rinzhou was defeated yesterday, although they were nervous, they weren't worried. No matter what, when Rinzhou wasn't in the top 10. And now, Meat Demon Harry was defeated. It made them recognize that this little chef was really fierce. Bufang patted the knife cabinet, and it slowly sank into the formation. Bufang rubbed his bandaged hand. He lifted his head, indifferently glancing at the 9 remaining opponents. No one said anything. Their eyes met in the air and sparks bloomed. All of a sudden, Bufang exhaled, his face emotionless as he raised his hand. His hand drew a line, pointing at the others. This is too slow. Why don't we do something more exciting? Bufang said seriously. Everybody was bewildered, looking at him as they didn't understand. He frowned, looking at Bufang. He didn't know what trick this little chef wanted to play. Bufang tilted his head, pointing at Ouyang Chinfeng. He said faintly, "You." Then, his finger moved, falling on the middle-aged man carrying the basket. "You." Bu Fang's expression was indifferent. His fingertip turned and landed on the man who was wearing a neat chef robe. He said, "And you. The three of you, come at me together. I'm going to have a chef's challenge with the three of you." As soon as he said that, the three people whom Bu Fang had pointed at were bewildered. They were ranked 10th, 9th, and 8th on the tablet of gluttony. Bu Fang wanted to have a chef's challenge with the three of them at the same time? Was this guy crazy? Chu Chongqing's eyes shrank. A moment later, a dazzling light shot out from his eyes, shooting everywhere. "Ouyang Chinfeng, Wang Tong, Lu Tao. The three of you, come at me together." Chu Chongqing's muscles bulged as he looked at Bu Fang. Xiao Ye had to stay in the Valley of Gluttony. Thus, Chu Chongqing had to resort to any means necessary. Anyway, it was Bu Fang's choice. Chu Chongqing's words made everybody dumbstruck. Ouyang Chinfeng and the other two were dumbstruck, looking at Chu Chongqing disbelievingly. The Great Elder wanted the three of them to fight at the same time? Wasn't that bullying? Chapter 735. At this moment, the entire Gluttony Square quieted down. Everybody craned their necks, not daring to breathe loudly. Their eyes gazed at the projection formation in the sky. That arrogant little chef pointed at the three chefs from the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony, talking nonchalantly about challenging three chefs one-on-one. This kind of arrogance, this kind of indifferent and high-spirited, caused everyone to completely explode after experiencing the initial silence. Enraged, did this little chef think that after defeating Meat Demon Meat, who ranked 5th on the tablet of gluttony, he could disdain and humiliate the chefs on the tablet of gluttony? The top 10 chefs of the tablet of gluttony were the Valley of Gluttony's pride. They were the role models for all chefs. However, Bu Fang's behavior was an insult to their role models. The most infuriating thing was that the Great Elder, Chu Chongqing, had agreed. How could he agree to such a humiliating condition? It made the Valley of Gluttony lose its face. The others in the arena didn't understand. They looked at Chu Chongqing in fright. Yan Yu's eyes shrank, his face stern. Did the Great Elder favor this little chef that much? If he didn't have the Taotai meat, how could Meat Demon Meat lose? As long as he didn't take out the Taotai meat, everything would be fine, right? Why did he agree to such a humiliating condition? The others also had the same thought. In their eyes, it was unnecessary for Chu Chongqing to agree to Bu Fang's condition of challenging three people one-on-one. It was to encourage this little chef's arrogance. Chu Chongqing didn't explain, but his eyes showed that he didn't allow anyone to doubt him. They didn't know why Chu Chongqing did it, and they couldn't understand him. However, Chu Chongqing was the Great Elder, so they couldn't refuse him. The jade bamboo shoot Wangtong took off his bamboo hat and put down the basket on his back. He let out a light breath, looked at Bu Fang with a calm gaze and said, "All right, I agree. I hope you won't regret it and I hope you won't disappoint me." Reverie Knife Lu Tao wore a cold smile on his face. Although Bu Fang's cooking skills weren't bad, he still didn't like this little chef. Arrogant. 3 people in one chef's challenge. You will be desperate soon. Ouyang Chinfeng's eyes were also a little gloomy. He looked at Bu Fang with a complicated gaze. Are we still going to fight after all? Anyway, I've been looking forward to it for a long time. This time, I'll do my best. The 3 chefs from the top 10 of the tablet of gluttony expressed their fighting will. Chu Chongqing's face became gentler, but he was still serious. He stood up and walked to the center of the arena. He glanced at Bu Fang, then at Ouyang Chinfeng and the other 2. Bu Fang, since you chose to challenge 3 people at the same time, the theme of this chef's challenge will be decided by you. In the end, Chu Chongqing was merciful. Although he wanted to win, he couldn't let go of his pride. After all, the Valley of Gluttony had its own pride. Bu Fang tilted his head, looking at Chu Chongqing. He exhaled gently. I fear nothing. Then, he rose his hand, pointing at the three of them. Then, let's have a one-on-one theme. Noodles, dishes. What are you good at? Bufang wanted to show off the three themes, but he suddenly realized that he didn't know what Reverie Knife Lu Tao was good at. Thus, he felt a little embarrassed. Reverie Knife Lu Tao's mouth twitched. Did this fellow look down on him? No matter what, he was ranked 8th on the tablet of gluttony. You want to compete with me in my area of expertise? You're really arrogant, Lu Tao said coldly. 1 against 3, and he wanted to challenge them in their area of expertise. This was arrogant to the extreme. I'm good at knife skills. Let's compete with knife skills, said Reverie Knife Lu Tao. Knife skills? Bufang was bewildered. He looked at Lu Tao with an odd face, then nodded. Speaking of knife skills, Bufang had never been afraid of anyone. Then, knife skills. Those are the three themes. Bufang lowered his hand, saying faintly, Then, we'll see you tomorrow. Then, Bufang put away his cooking utensils, turning around and walking to Xiao Bai's team. Patting Xiao Yu's head, Bufang continued to walk. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled as he followed Bufang. 2 people and a puppet disappeared from the gluttony square shortly. After they had left, the entire square burst into an uproar. Everybody clamored unceasingly. Crazy! Crazy! Oh my God! He's 2F** King arrogant. This fellow. Someone has to teach him a lesson. Even Special Chef Yen doesn't dare to challenge 3 people at the same time in a chef's challenge. This fellow is a lunatic. The audience was so crazy. Their faces were filled with excitement as they vented out the shock and excitement in their hearts. Yen Yu and the others looked at Bufang's back as he left, taking deep breaths. Mu Cheng's face was solemn. Her fingers stroked her red lips as she squinted. What an arrogant young man. Big sister likes him. Lu Jelly wore a serious face. His clothes were neat and tidy, and he didn't seem to mind Bufang's arrogant tone. He was reading a small book. When Mu Cheng saw him, she smiled and walked over. Lu Jelly furrowed his brows, glancing at her. Yen Yu, Mu Cheng, and Lu Jelly were special-grade chefs, and their culinary skills were exquisite. Although they were shocked by Bufang's arrogance, the 3 of them didn't put him in their eyes. Mu Cheng and Lu Jelly didn't mind at all. Although Yen Yu was enraged, he was merely enraged. Ouyang Chenfeng's face was incomparably solemn. His hand flashed, and a kitchen knife as thin as a cicada's wing appeared in his hand. He stroked the kitchen knife and gently exhaled. Old buddy, we have to fight side by side again. I hope this time I won't lose you. Jade Bamboo Shoot Wang Tong, the 9th chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, shouldered his basket. He didn't say anything, turning around and walking out of the arena. Shortly after, his figure disappeared. Reverie Knife Lu Tao squinted. The murderous aura on his body surged, and the reverie knife in his hand sparkled unceasingly. The audience in the Gluttony Gods building looked at the 3 of them, cheering and cheering. Compared to Meat Demon Dog, the 3 of them were much more popular. Their cheering had almost overturned the Gluttony Gods building. Tomorrow's Chef's Challenge seemed to be more exciting and eye-catching than today's Chef's Challenge. Although they weren't satisfied, they were looking forward to tomorrow's Chef's Challenge. They all wanted to see Bufang's defeat in the Chef's Challenge against the 3 chefs. The smoke and dust dispersed. Saint Daughter Ziyun gawked, dropping her jaw as she looked at the quiet sky. She rubbed her eyes as if she couldn't believe what she had just seen. The previous scene had made her hair rise on her nape. That was a clone of her father, Amethyst Elder, even though it was just a clone. Although it was just a clone, his fighting prowess could be compared to an existence at the Divine Soul Realm with a 5-step soul ladder. No matter what, if they wanted to capture her, they had to send at least an existence at the Divine Soul Realm with a 5-step soul ladder. Saint Daughter Ziyun's cultivation base had reached the Divine Soul Realm with a 4-step soul ladder. Just a moment ago, She thought that her handsome little brother would be stomped to death by her father's clone. However, who would have thought that her little brother, who wasn't eye-catching at all, could slap her father's clone so domineeringly? That slap had changed the color of the wind and clouds, and it could even shatter mountains and rivers. Together with that little brother's melancholy eyes, he was so mesmerizing. Saint Daughter Ziyun felt as if her heart had suddenly started beating at an extremely fast speed. Hades Era yawned. He swung his hand, flicked his hair, and cocked his head to look at Saint Daughter Ziyun. All right, I've persuaded that brother to leave. Young man, you can follow I now. I will take you to eat spicy strip. Spicy strips? What was that? Ziyun didn't know what the handsome little brother had been talking about. She just heard him say follow I. Her face blushed. Okay. Ziyun's purple hair fluttered in the wind. She rubbed her fingers, blushing, and lowered her head. Then, she mumbled something inaudible. Hades Era's eyes brightened. He clapped his hands and said excitedly, "Good, young man." He said excitedly, "Very good. Youngster, since we are already on the same side, tell me, which direction is Heavenly Mist City?" What? Saint Daughter Ziyun was bewildered. Heavenly Mist City. Where is it? Heavenly Mist City. It's the city with the Cloud Mist restaurant. Owner Boo lives there, and they also have delicious spicy strips, Hades said with dark circles under his eyes. Ziyun was bewildered. It was the first time she had left the Heavenly Spring Holy Land. How could she know anything about Heavenly Mist City? Young man, you don't know the way? Then what do I need you for? Hades felt so sad that his balls ached. He covered his face with one hand, and his hair fell through his fingers. He looked so gloomy. Ziyun's mouth twitched. That little brother was kind enough to save her because he didn't know the way. However, looking at Hades Era's melancholy face, Ziyun's heart shivered. Although I don't know where Heavenly Mist City is, I know where to find delicious food. Saint Daughter Ziyun said seriously. Although she didn't know what spicy strips were, they were delicious food. If they went to the Holy Land of Chefs in the Hidden Dragon Continent, they could eat whatever they wanted. Hades Era was bewildered. He asked, "Really? Do you have spicy strips?" A charming smile bloomed on Ziyun's beautiful face. "Absolutely. Pow." Hades Era patted Ziyun's shoulder, speaking gloomily. "Young man, I'm counting on you. The days without spicy strips make I so sad that I can't breathe. Take I there." Ziyun was so happy. "Okay, I will satisfy you." After saying that, Ziyun's hand shook. Instantly, a jet of light flashed, and a dark green spirit boat floated above her head. "Come on, get on the boat. We'll go together." Ziyun's beautiful face blushed. Nether King Erha glanced at the dark green spirit boat, then at Ziyun's blushing face. "Don't be shy. Your spirit boat is small, but I have a big one. Take eyes. I don't tell ordinary people," the Nether King said. After saying that, his hand shook and a jet of black light shot out. A moment later, a massive black skull emerged in the void. It was so huge, and thick black smoke filled the air. Ziyun lifted her head, her face bewildered. Chapter 736. The Hidden Dragon Continent was immensely vast. The center of the continent was vast, with continuous mountain ranges. Some mountains bloomed with five-colored radiance, and some were as sharp as swords. These mountain ranges all had their own features, with abundant spirit energy. The Hidden Dragon Royal Court consisted of the 7 Great Sages' lands and many small forces. The 7 Great Sages' lands were the supreme ruling force of the Royal Court. The Heavenly Secret Holy Land was the most mysterious Holy Land among the Royal Court's Holy Lands. Compared to the other forces, it was much more mysterious. The Heavenly Secret Holy Land was located in the center of the continent, occupying a valley. The valley was empty, with a winding path. It didn't have the luxurious buildings of the other Holy Lands, and it didn't have the intimidating city walls that gave people immense pressure. Simple houses were built in every corner of the valley. Just like a blooming fruit, those houses with black tiles and white walls formed a mysterious formation in the valley, which made the energy in the valley circulate unceasingly. With a squeak, the door of a house was pushed open. The heavenly secret saintess, who was wearing a white veil over her face, slowly walked out. She was holding a small star compass in her hand. Her long eyelashes fluttered, slightly trembling. She came to a house, pausing for a while. Then, she heard someone calling her, so she pushed the door open. The room was a completely different world, which was several times bigger than the outside of the house. In the middle of the room was a round star compass around 10 meters in diameter. Countless starlight dots were moving on the compass, twinkling unceasingly, which was really mesmerizing. An old woman with white hair combed meticulously, with a gentle face, stood around the star compass with her hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes gazed at the star compass, but no one knew what she was looking at. After the heavenly secret saintess came in, she just stood aside quietly. "I know why you're here to see me. You've been to the Valley of Gluttony, and you've seen the person you wanted to see. There are some things that you should let go of," said the old woman, drawing something on the star compass. "The hidden dragon continent looks peaceful now, but in fact, it's turbulent and dangerous. If the Great Path's principle didn't suppress it, the brutal creatures of the netherworld would have invaded the hidden dragon continent, turning it into hell on earth." The heavenly secret saintess' long eyelashes shivered. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't. "I know you're here to suggest going to the Valley of Gluttony, but this time I won't allow it." The old woman finally lifted her head, her calm eyes looking at the heavenly secret saintess. "You're the first person in 100 years who could trigger the heavenly star catcher disc. I won't let you take risk." "But, Granny Imo, you know that the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance is a trap," said the heavenly secret saintess. "Don't say any more. Life and death are determined by fate. You can't interfere. The heavenly secret Holy Land didn't teach you the heavenly secret art to save people. It's to help you control the heavenly star catcher disc as soon as possible. I have to understand the mysteries of the heavenly star catcher disc before the Great Path changes. Only then can I have a chance to survive in the future. All the Holy Lands are making preparations. How can you disrupt the heavenly secret Holy Land's preparations just because of one person?" the old lady said. The heavenly secret saintess's eyes moved. Eventually, she sighed dispiritedly. "You don't need to care about the Valley of Gluttony. The Great Path's principle is changing. Didn't you see that the starlight on the heavenly star catcher disc is getting brighter? More and more great void realm experts are appearing in the hidden dragon continent. You know what it means," said the old lady. "Go back. Don't have any thoughts. Understand the mysteries of the heavenly star catcher disc. Only then can you control your fate." The heavenly secret saintess kept silent for a while. Then, she turned around and left. The old lady leaned on her walking stick, her eyes deep. She made some mysterious hand seals, sending them into the star compass in front of her. Instantly, the star compass glowed brilliantly. Countless stars moved in a mysterious orbit. What? The Valley of Gluttony has a star twinkling? Could it be that something is going to happen in the Tautye's inheritance this time? The old woman frowned. Looking at the star that was giving off an extremely bright light, she took a deep breath. In the Valley of Gluttony, everybody couldn't calm their excitement. It wasn't because of anything else but the exciting chef's challenge that was going to happen tomorrow. That arrogant young chef wanted to challenge 3 chefs from the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony at the same time. This level of arrogance was simply inconceivable. Many people thought that he was crazy. A chef's challenge was something that required a lot of energy. Each chef had to cook one dish. To cook that dish, some chefs had to exhaust themselves mentally and physically, consuming a lot of their spirit, energy, and soul. Ordinary people couldn't endure one chef's challenge. That chef wanted to do 3 chef's challenges at the same time. He was risking his life in the chef's challenge. However, they had to admit that they were looking forward to it. Perhaps they were waiting for Bufang to fail, but some were waiting for Bufang to create a miracle. Noodle King Restaurant. Today the restaurant was closed. It wasn't open for business. Outside the kitchen, there were many chefs surrounding the entrance. They looked at the tightly shut kitchen door with complicated expressions and incomparably heavy expressions. They didn't know what Noodle King Ouyang Chinfeng was doing in the kitchen. However, what they could do now was to wait. Not only Noodle King, but Jade Bamboo Shoot Wang Tong also locked himself in his room, studying and tinkering. Reverie Knife Lu Tao was very confident in his knife skills. This time, he wanted to compete with that scary dark horse chef in knife skills. He wanted to use his knife skills to crush that chef. Meanwhile, in an inn in the Glutton God City, Bufang turned off the light in the kitchen, slowly walking out. He didn't do any complicated cultivation. After returning to his room, he lay down and breathed steadily, falling asleep. It was late at night. The autumn wind blew the fallen leaves, rolling in the air. The next day, at dawn, the Glutton God City, which had been quiet for a whole night, was now bustling with noise and excitement. The Glutton Gods Building Square had welcomed a large number of spectators. They had surrounded the Glutton Gods Building. No matter what, today's Chef's Challenge would be very exciting. 1 against 3. It had never happened before in the history of Chef's Challenges. More importantly, he was going to challenge 3 top chefs from the Tablet of Gluttony. Noodles, bamboo shoots, and knife skills, it was today's theme. Bufang wanted to fight against 3 people at the same time. It was really difficult, and it was inhuman. Even a special grade chef wouldn't dare to do that. After reaching the top 10 of the Tablet of Gluttony, the gap between the chef's cooking standards would shrink. Bufang got out of bed and practiced his cooking and knife skills in the kitchen for a while. Then, he brought Xiaoye and Whitey out of the inn, walking on the streets that were filled with the scent of late autumn. The air had started to cool down. When Bufang arrived at the Glutton Gods Building Square, the square was already packed with people. 2 people and a puppet followed the crowd, slowly walking into the Glutton Gods Building Square. What greeted them was the ear-splitting noise that reached the sky. The others also took their places. The 3 special grade chefs, the Great Elder, and the 6th Elder were there, sitting on the judges' seats. The stoves on the arena had changed. The arrangement of the stoves was filled with an aura of tit for tat. Ouyang Chinfeng, Wang Tong, and Lu Tao's stoves formed a triangle, surrounding Bufang's stove in the middle. When the 3 of them connected, their auras were like an unbreakable city wall. Bufang calmly swept his gaze over the 3 of them, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. To Bufang, 1 against 3 in a chef's challenge was really stressful. However, when there was pressure, there would be motivation. Only then could he improve. Bufang wanted to stand on the top of the food chain in this fantasy world, the god of cooking. Only by pressuring himself could he grow faster. Today, Chu Chongxing was wearing a loose robe, his face solemn. He walked to the center of the arena, looking at the 4 chefs. Their auras were expanding, bursting with vigorous fighting will. Thus, he didn't talk much, directly announcing the start of the chef's challenge. However, this chef's challenge was the most nerve-wracking chef's challenge he had ever hosted. 1 against 3. That Bufang was a madman. The ingredients have been prepared. This time, everyone will use the same ingredients. It's a competition of cooking skills. I hope you can have a hearty chef's challenge, Chu Chongxing said calmly. That's right. The ingredients were pushed out, and dense spiritual energy burst out. A portion of wheat flour, several bamboo shoots that were glowing with a glazed light, and a large pile of spirit fruits. They were the ingredients of this chef's challenge. In the previous chef's challenge, Bufang had directly taken out the Taoyes meat, which had helped him win easily. This time, he had to limit the use of the Taoyes meat. After all, it was a cheating tool. Many people didn't know why Bufang could take out the Taoyes meat. However, once Bufang took out that ingredient, even Yen Yu would have a hard time winning. Noodle King Ouyang Chinfeng wore a solemn face. He was a little excited, and the muscles on his face shivered. He had never thought that one day, he would stand on the chef's challenge stage against Bufang. Bufang's knife-shaved noodles had shaken him, but he wouldn't back off like that. As the Noodle King, he had his own pride. Buzz, a kitchen knife as thin as a cicada's wing emerged, its light flashing. Jade Bamboo Shoot Wong Tong held a kitchen knife that looked like a white jade, indifferently looking at Bufang. The broken jade knife was a kitchen knife that was close to a famous knife. Reverie Knife Lu Tao gazed at Bufang. His fighting will shot up into the sky. This time, they had to protect the Valley of Gluttony's face. They couldn't lose because they represented the Valley of Gluttony. If they lost to this arrogant little chef in the chef's challenge, the Valley of Gluttony would lose all its face. Green smoke twirled in Bufang's hand. The dragon bone kitchen knife emerged, his eyes indifferent. If you're ready, let's begin. Outside the Valley of Gluttony the void shook. Then, a massive crack appeared, and a cold metal warship slowly sailed out of it. The Heavenly Spring Holy Land's flag fluttered on the warship. An old man carrying the god-slaying giant axe stood on the deck of the ship. His eyes were bright. He was looking at the Gluttony God City. Chapter 737. Rumble. Rumble. Thick black smoke diffused. It sounded like an enraged beast or a divine beast was roaring, shaking the entire space. High up in the sky, a massive shadow shrouded in black smoke was moving fast. Taking a closer look, one would feel a chill run down their spine. That's because the black shadow was actually a huge skull. The skull opened its mouth and black aura constantly spewed out, causing the skull to swiftly streak through the void. Inside the skull, there were 2 large eye sockets, and 2 heads were pressed against one of the eye socket. Nether King Ha's entire head of hair was blown messily by the wind, and his mouth was trembling. Saint Daughter Ziyun's head was also resting on her eyes. She squinted her beautiful eyes, and her fair skin was trembling slightly like a sparkling jelly. Her exquisite nose was slightly wrinkled, and the corners of her mouth were raised. Brother Ha, why can't you keep the wind away from your luxurious ride? Ziyun squinted, screaming at the top of her lungs. Because of the wind, she had to use all of her strength to shout so that Hades could hear her. Era squinted. His dark eye circles drooped, and he looked weak. He opened his mouth, and the wind poured in, making him squeal. Don't you think it's fun to ride in the wind like this? Hades also shouted. Yeah, it's fun, but I always feel something strange. Saint Daughter Ziyun screamed. It's not strange at all. I slaughtered an abyssal demon and used its head to craft this skull. Look, isn't it more handsome than your spirit boat? The Nether King continued to shout loudly. It's really handsome, but why doesn't it keep the wind away? Normal spirit boats can keep the wind away. Ziyun was still shouting. Hades's nostrils flared, glancing at Ziyun. Don't talk anymore. I'm so tired. Without spicy strips, I want to be baptized by the wind. Ziyun screamed, Brother Ha, we're about to reach the Valley of Gluttony. You can definitely eat the spicy strips you want. Hades's dark eye circles narrowed. Really? You're so awesome. In the sky, the 2 of them roared at each other in the eyes of the giant skull. The black skull drew a black line in the void as it sped towards the distance, causing space to tremble. Shortly after, it disappeared. In the distance, the majestic Valley of Gluttony gradually came into view. The chefs in the Gluttony Square showed their kitchen knives. That dazzling blade light soared into the sky, causing the entire Gluttony Square's atmosphere to explode at this moment. The clamor was so loud that it seemed like the entire sky was about to be overturned. Noodle King Ouyang Chinfeng's face was solemn. The cicada wing kitchen knife in his hand was trembling like a cicada's wings, making a slight buzzing sound. Ouyang Chinfeng did not dare to be careless, so he had to give it his all in this match. He had witnessed Bufang's cooking skills. Even if it was the noodle dish, Bufang wasn't weak. Bufang, I won't bully you. The dish I'm going to cook today is the heaven burial noodles that I've improved after one night of contemplation. I hope you won't let me down, said Ouyang Chinfeng. A moment later, the cicada wing knife in his hand flew up. After twirling the knife for a while, he returned to his stove in the next moment. The main ingredient was wheat flour. However, Ouyang Chinfeng's heaven burial noodles didn't only have wheat flour. His bowl of heaven burial noodles had made him one of the top 10 dishes of the tablet of gluttony. Although he didn't have a competitive mentality, his level wasn't weak at all. He gave Bufang a deep look. In the next moment, Ouyang Chinfeng slowly took out his ingredients from the cupboard. The ingredients were the key to a bowl of noodles. However, the ingredients couldn't be too eye-catching. Otherwise, it would steal the noodles' elegance. If that happened, this bowl of noodles would be a failure. Swish! Ouyang Chinfeng's hair fluttered in the wind as he tore down the huge curtain that was covering his back. Looking at the ingredients behind him, the crowd burst into an uproar and let out a clamor. Oh my God! What's that? Those are bird-type spirit beasts. Is Chef Noodle King going to cook his specialty, the heaven burial noodles? The heaven burial noodles. That's the dish he used to defeat the chef who ranked 10th on the tablet of gluttony. The audience was in an uproar. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. Of course, they had heard about Ouyang Chinfeng, the Noodle King. He was famous for his heaven burial noodles. However, it had been a long time since he cooked the heaven burial noodles. Ouyang Chinfeng took out a strip of white cloth and tied it on his forehead. Instantly, his eyes became sharp. Behind me are 99 kinds of bird-type spirit beasts. My heaven burial noodles will use those 99 kinds of spirit beasts as ingredients, said Ouyang Chinfeng in a low voice. Everyone held their breaths, looking at the Noodle King with solemn eyes. Even Yen Yu and the others had solemn faces. The heaven burial noodles were like thunder piercing their ears. Crack! Crack! The cicada-winged knife swung. Knife light flashed, and the cages behind him broke one by one. Swish! Swish! The spirit beasts trapped in the bird-type cages spread their wings and soared up. Feathers fluttered in the air. Their eyes sparkled with the desire for freedom as they soared up into the sky. However, shortly after, those bird-type spirit beasts despaired because the knife light descended from the sky. The heads of those bird-type spirit beasts were chopped off. Thud! Thud! Tens of thousands of knife lights exploded in just a blink of an eye. Countless bird-type spirit beasts were killed. Blood splashed as if it was raining blood. Ouyang Chinfeng's face was cold. His eyes didn't have a beam of emotion, as if he was singing a sad funeral song. Everyone seemed to have forgotten to breathe, and their eyes were filled with terror. No one had thought that Ouyang Chinfeng, who had always been a nice guy, could have such a murderous aura. Bufang's eyes shrank. He took a deep breath. Looking at the blood rain around Ouyang Chinfeng and the bird-type spirit beasts wailing and crying, the funeral song created by those wailing and crying shook people's minds. The heaven burial noodles weren't ordinary at all. The cicada-winged knife was as thin as a cicada's wing. It looked like a transparent kitchen knife as it spun in Ouyang Chinfeng's hand. His hand moved so fast that people couldn't see it clearly. He dealt with each bird-type spirit beast falling from the sky. He plucked its feathers, removed its internal organs, and more. Next to him was a big wok. The fire in the stove shot up to the sky, and the hot water in the wok was boiling. He threw the bird spirit beasts that he had dealt with into the wok. Gurgle 1, 2, 3. Shortly after, he had thrown all the bird-type spirit beasts into the wok. Those birds weren't big, but they were enough to fill the wok. Ouyang Chinfeng took the lid off the wok and started to boil. On the other side, he didn't stop to rest. He took the prepared white flour, which was the special white flour of the Valley of Gluttony. It was made of special spirit rice, which emitted a sparkling radiance and was really fragrant. Swish, swish. Ouyang Chunfeng took a bowl of boiling blood. His face was cold as he poured it into the flour. In just a blink of an eye, the white flour was dyed blood red. Everybody was shaken. Ouyang Chunfeng had used blood to knead the flour. Could this kind of noodles be eaten? Many people's faces turned unsightly. It turned out that the heaven burial face was made this way. Bufang was calm, but his eyes were a little surprised. He knew that the heaven burial noodles wasn't ordinary. Don't just pay attention to Ouyang Chunfeng. I'm Broken Jade Knife Wang Tong. I also want to learn from your cooking skills. Wang Tong took off the basket on his back and his bamboo hat, speaking casually. His eyes were indifferent, and his hair was black and white, which gave people a feeling that he had spent many years in vain. My dish is called Moonset Crow Caw. I hope you won't disappoint me, Wang Tong said indifferently. A moment later, he held the milk-white broken jade knife single-handedly. He took the glazed bamboo shoot that he had prepared. Placing the glazed bamboo shoot on the stove, the broken jade knife cut it from different directions. The green skin and leaves of the glazed bamboo shoot were cut, revealing the green bamboo shoot meat. Wang Tong glanced at Bufang, then carefully took out a muddy wine jar from the basket. He sighed, and with nostalgia, he opened the seal. In an instant, a fragrant aroma pervaded the air. Everybody couldn't help but take a deep breath. It wasn't wine, but it was more intoxicating than wine. Wang Tong's gloomy morning dew. Chu Changxing's eyes focused, looking at the wine jar in Wang Tong's hand. It was the first time he saw Wang Tong take out this wine jar. If it weren't for the chef's challenge, it would be hard to see the famous dishes of the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Speaking of this, even Chu Changxing had to admit that Bufang had really pressured the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Wang Tong didn't say anything. He took out a ladle made of purple bamboo and slowly scooped out a 5-colored liquid from it. Then, he let the liquid drip down along the bamboo shoot meat. As soon as the liquid touched the bamboo shoot meat, it melted in just a blink of an eye. The green bamboo shoot meat radiated 5-colored radiance in just a blink of an eye. Moonset Crow Caw. It was the dish Wang Tong had prepared to commemorate his deceased wife and daughter, which was full of sorrow. The skills of those chefs had ignited the enthusiasm of the audience. They were the real top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. If they were serious, they could absolutely crush that arrogant little chef. Reverie Knife Lu Tao didn't move. He just sneered, looking at Bufang. It seemed he wasn't in a hurry to take action. He wanted to compete with Bufang on his knife skill, so he wasn't in a hurry. Perhaps Bufang would not be able to last until the time to compete with him. Bufang's eyes slightly narrowed, and the muscles on his body slightly trembled. That was because of excitement. This kind of excitement made Bufang's emotionless face twitch. He opened his mouth and exhaled. Bufang lifted his head, his eyes blazing. "Come, let me feel the pressure." Roar. His true energy was full. Instantly, the dragon bone kitchen knife bloomed with gold radiance. A dragon roar reverberated through the 9 heavens. Everybody was bewildered. They seemed to see a long, gold dragon hovering above them. Outside the Valley of Gluttony, the warship moved horizontally, releasing ear-piercing explosions. The warship didn't stop to take a break. It continued to crush the Valley of Gluttony. The guards on the Gluttony God City roared, releasing the true energy from their bodies. The old man carrying the giant god-slaying axe stood in front of the warship, talking casually. "Kill. Stop them. Kill them all." Swoosh. The golden armor guards behind him responded immediately, shooting out. A moment later, blood light shot up into the sky above the Gluttony God City's wall. Murderous aura filled the air. Chapter 738. God-Slaying Weapon. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled, gazing at the giant axe in the old man's hand. All of a sudden, however, It was the best battleship of the heavenly spring Holy Land, which had endless power. It directly smashed the city wall, sending gravel and rubble everywhere. Chu Chongqing's eyes were as cold as lightning. His aura fluctuated, and his face was dark and gloomy. Looking at the bloody street, the flame of anger in his heart surged unceasingly. The old man was enraged. He wielded the god-slaying axe single-handedly, drawing an arc in the air, aiming at the approaching figure. Inside the skulls, there were two figures shouting at each other loudly. Experts from the Holy Lands appeared. Their eyes sparkled as they looked at the Valley of Gluttony. The glutton god city was broken, and the city wall was crumbling. They knew the calamity of the Valley of Gluttony was about to begin. What? Chu Chongqing's eyes focused. His face became cold, and his murderous aura shot out. You iron lump! You dare to covet my god-slaying weapon! You want to die! A moment later, the metal wings on Xiao Bai's back opened. Clanging sounds resounded, and the metal light was dazzling. Old thing from the heavenly spring Holy Land. You must die. All of a sudden, Xiao Bai's body moved. A big hand that looked like a leaf fan slammed down on the old man's head. In the Glutton Gods Building square, everybody was watching the chef's challenge. They didn't know what was happening outside the Glutton Gods Building. Did he have to host this chef's challenge again? Xiao Bai's eyes, which were originally very gentle, suddenly changed at this moment. They turned from red to grayish-white. Ouyang Qinfeng used beast blood to knead the dough, so he would use good wine to knead the dough. The heaven burial noodles emitted a sorrowful aura, which made Bufang frown. If so, he would cook a dish with the same sorrowful aura. It was just a puppet. The old man took a step forward, and his aura rose unceasingly. The old man's eyes were like torches, gazing at the tall city wall of the Glutton God City. On the city wall, the massacre was still ongoing. The sixth elder's mustache slightly tilted up. It can't be. Is the great elder planning to be a hands-off shopkeeper again? The elder from the heavenly spring Holy Land raised his hand and grabbed the god-slaying axe on his back. He slowly lowered it as his aura continued to rise. Looking up, Xiaoye couldn't help but let go of Xiao Bai's thigh and took a step back. Because he discovered that the rod in Xiao Bai's hand was actually a god-slaying weapon. Sword radiance overflowed in all directions. An expert flying on a sword was rushing over. Damn it! However, he didn't affect the chef's challenge. With a step, he disappeared from his spot. On the metal warship, the old man lifted his head. His eyes were like torches as he crazily gazed at Chu Chongqing, who was soaring in the sky. The corners of his mouth parted, his murderous aura diffusing everywhere. Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. In the next moment, his body suddenly changed. Only to see a rumbling sound, a gale howled, and a black wind swept across. Boom! Chu Chongqing, you've finally come out. An expert stepped on the air, his domineering aura diffusing everywhere. Xiaoye hugged Xiao Bai's thigh, standing in the distance. An uproar arose. The residents of the Glutton God City screamed in fear. Was it the enemy's invasion? The sound of something tearing through the air resounded. The void seemed to be unable to bear the heavy burden. The elder was half-naked, and he carried a huge god-slaying axe on his back. There were many patterns on the axe's head, and it was extremely mysterious, as if it could attract people's attention. Ouyang Qinfeng's heaven burial noodles couldn't be compared to ordinary noodles. If Bufang wanted to win, he had to show his true abilities. A giant skull fearlessly dashed over from afar. Its metal wings spread open, sparkling under the radiance. Its round head, round body, and ash-gray mechanical eyes, cries of horror resounded throughout the long street. Which expert from the Holy Land had come? The old man wanted to take revenge, but now, he was enraged. His murderous aura surged as he wanted to chop that iron puppet into pieces. He found an oppressive aura, and a shadow dashed over. Didn't only the Holy Lands have god-slaying weapons? How could they have a puppet? Was that puppet one of them? The golden armor guard was cold and solemn. He held a weapon in his hand, dashing fast. Each time he swung his weapon, he would chop the enemy into pieces. Light spun on his abdomen. A moment later, a scarlet metal stick emerged. Last night, he had considered carefully and decided on the noodles he wanted to cook today. However, he wasn't qualified to host this chef's challenge. There was a loud bang. The elder's galloping body suddenly trembled. The old man from the heavenly spring holy land was bewildered. A moment later, he was enraged. His face was so dark that it could drip water. He turned his head to look. Above his head, a white soul ladder began to congregate. Buzz, the old man was startled. Looking at the metal stick in Xiao Bai's hand, his scalp went numb. She looked at the chef's challenge on the stage, and curiosity flashed in her eyes. Her face was also filled with envy. Looking at everyone cooking, she felt a little happy in her heart. She also wanted to cook. That metal stick was covered with patterns. Chu Chongqing's white hair and beard fluttered in the air. His clothes exploded, and a rumbling sound reverberated from his body. His blood and energy were like waves, constantly beating the shore. Bufang's face became colder. The old man stood on the bow of the warship, his face cold. His eyes gazed at the giant Gluttony Gods building as he directed the warship to rush toward that person. He took out the white flower he had prepared. The old man was enraged. The guards of the Valley of Gluttony were fighting bravely. Their bodies were dyed in blood, and they roared. They swung their weapons and charged toward the enemy. They wanted to use their bodies to perish together with the enemy. You want to die? Xiao Yu was bewildered. What happened? Why did Xiao Bai go berserk all of a sudden? Detected the aura of the god-slaying equipment. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled, his voice cold. On the Gluttony Square, the clamor in the Gluttony Square seemed to have suppressed the battle cries in front of the city gate. The fan-like hand rose, patting Xiao Yu's head. Xiao Yu was a little bewildered. Bufang leisurely took out the Frost Blaze Path Understanding brew from the system-dimensional bag. He poured the clear wine into the white flour and began to knead it. All of a sudden, an explosive shout reverberated in the sky. The war god's stick was in his hand. Boom! Boom! This puppet that came out of nowhere dared to covet the god-slaying equipment that Lord Amethyst Elder had given him. Outside the Valley of Gluttony, however, they were the elite golden armor guards of the heavenly spring Holy Land who had been baptized in blood. Each of them was an expert in fighting and killing. In just a moment, blood splashed on the city wall, and corpses littered the ground. No doubt, in this battle, the Gluttony God City was breached. As they were the creators of this calamity, they had to get a share of the loot. Bufang didn't know about Xiao Bai's change. At this moment, he was unprecedentedly solemn, putting his heart and soul into cooking. Heavenly Spring Holy Land, you've gone too far. Xiao Bai's aura burst out all of a sudden. Who asked the Valley of Gluttony to control something it couldn't protect? An ordinary man's wealth was his own ruin. Everybody was bewildered. What was going on? Sharp spikes emerged on his round head, and his back was also covered with many spikes. His body became ferocious in just a blink of an eye, and a murderous aura filled the air. Chu Chongqing looked at the old man as if he was looking at an idiot. Who the F***ck is on our side? All of a sudden, many experts were bewildered. Kill! The old man roared. The golden armor guards underneath also released their auras, forming a battle formation. They soared up into the sky, dashing toward Chu Chongqing. You dare? A figure stepped through the air, incomparably powerful, towering and majestic, standing proudly in the heavens. Bufang took a deep breath. Fight poison with poison, turning the sorrow into a river. It was a massacre. The warship moved forward unceasingly, crushing the houses. Blood splashed everywhere, and the stench of blood filled the air. Chu Chongqing, who was wearing a long robe and watching the chef's challenge, suddenly felt something. His brows furrowed. He seemed to sense something, tilting his head to look outside. Facing Ouyang Chinfeng, whose aura had changed greatly, and Wang Tong, who had experienced many vicissitudes of life, Bufang felt a wave of pressure. The metal warship fiercely hit the Gluttony God City. Instantly, the light of the formation on the city wall sparkled, trying to stop the warship's attack. Some experts in the Valley of Gluttony had woken up, and they joined the defending army to resist the enemy's invasion. The golden armor guards opened the way, and blood splashed everywhere. Corpses lay everywhere. Chu Changxing's eyes focused. An ice-cold metal warship slowly moved forward. The Heavenly Spring Holy Land's flag fluttered. The warship continued to move forward, unceasingly crushing the people on the long street of the Gluttony God City. Fresh blood sprayed all over the ground. On one side, blood flowed like a river, while on the other side, it was noisy and clamorous. It was a startling contrast. The warship's pressure was so oppressive. Incomparably loud, the terrifying pressure surged. Was it the beginning of chaos? The god-slaying axe glowed under the sunlight. Chu Changxing clenched his fists, making cracking sounds. Chu Changxing didn't expect that Xiao Bai would appear all of a sudden. Moreover, his target was the god-slaying weapon in the opponent's hand. Who's there? What kind of monster did Bufang raise? Chu Changxing stood up from his seat, and his terrifying aura expanded. Xiao Bai's metal wings flap. With a screech, Xiao Bai's figure disappeared into the distance, dashing toward the outside of the Gluttony Gods building. Boom! The old man rolled his eyes in rage. The one who attacked him was a puppet. Indeed, Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes twinkled, and he swung his stick. Chu Changxing's eyes were cold. The muscles on his body bulged, and his veins bulged. He looked so ferocious. There was a loud bang. The elders of the Valley of Gluttony opened their eyes, taking in a breath of cold air. The people from the Heavenly Spring Holy Land couldn't endure it anymore. Begin the slaughter. The fan-like hand shrank, then hovered in the air. Thinking about that, the old man furrowed his brows. We're on the same side. Don't attack. Chapter 739. The dough made of blood-colored flour spun in Ouyang Chinfeng's hand. Waves of energy swirled around, making the dough shine brilliantly. Rumble! Rumble! The boiling wok began to boil. The lid of the wok trembled, and steam gushed out from the wok. Ouyang Chinfeng's face was solemn. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion. This was a far cry from his usual gentle appearance. Many people rarely saw this side of him. Swish! The blood-colored flour swirled. In the next moment, the dough in Ouyang Chinfeng's hand was stretched. He reached out a finger, pointing at the dough. With a wave of his hand, the dough spun in the air. As it spun, a strand of noodles as thin as a dragon's whisker was pulled out, spinning and spreading continuously. Soon, the noodles around Ouyang Chinfeng's body were like blooming flowers, fluttering and dancing. As the flower swirled, it actually emitted a strange beauty. Everyone was silent and immersed. When they knew that the flower was dyed with blood, they were shocked. However, at this moment there was only admiration. The strands of noodles danced like ribbons, extremely gorgeous. All of a sudden, the noodles were swept up, falling into Ouyang Chinfeng's hand. The blood-colored noodles emitted a strange brilliance. After placing the noodles on the stove, Ouyang Chinfeng walked towards the boiling cauldron. There were 99 spirit birds simmering inside. He lifted the lid of the wok, and a wave of surging meaty energy rushed up to the sky. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, feeling that it was a ghastly sight. Ouyang Chinfeng fished out all the spirit birds. The meat of the spirit birds was half-cooked, and steam was rising from their bodies. However, Ouyang Chinfeng didn't seem to want to end it like this. He poured away all the soup he had cooked for the first time, then, he put the spirit birds back into the wok, and began to cook. This time, during the cooking process, he constantly sprinkled the cut spirit herbs into the wok. When the herbs were sprinkled on the spirit bird's meat, the color of the meat became tempting. Was this the soup base for cooking noodles? For a bowl of noodles, besides the noodles, the soup base was also important. This soup base was very important, no matter if it was used to cook noodles or to make broth. According to Ouyang Qinfeng's method, he planned to use 99 spirit birds as the soup base, which was a test of his skills. However, in the next moment, Ouyang Qinfeng poured away the soup base again. The second time, he gave up on the soup base. For the third time, he boiled the soup base. This time, he added many spiritual herbs. These spiritual herbs actually emitted a unique fragrance along with the boiling of the soup. Swish, swish. 99 spirit birds were taken out. The cicada blade spun in his hand at an extremely fast speed. It was as thin as a cicada's wings, and every time it slashed, a piece of soft meat would be cut off from the abdomen of the spiritual beast bird, turning it into a thin slice. Bufang only took a thin slice from each spirit beast bird and put them together. 99 slices were instantly cut into powder by the cicada blade. Ouyang Qinfeng collected the powder-like pieces of minced meat for later use. With a shake of his hand, he scooped up the blood-colored noodles. The blood-soaked noodles had a unique smell of blood. Ouyang Qinfeng's face didn't change. He carefully put the noodles into the boiling soup base. The soup base was very fragrant, with the aroma of spirit herbs and the rich fragrance of the meat. When the two were mixed, it had a special taste. Swish. As soon as the noodles were put in, Ouyang Qinfeng let them swim in the pot. He shook them, and the boiling soup base was reflected in his eyes. Suddenly, Ouyang Qinfeng's hand shook, and he pulled the noodles out. The noodles spun in the air, and the soup splashed. 5 small bowls were prepared, and they were placed one by one. The red noodles exuded a strange beauty, and after being soaked in the soup, they shone brightly. After putting them into the 5 bowls, Ouyang Qinfeng scooped out the soup and poured it into the bowls. Swish. The clear soup was as clear as spring water. When it was poured into the bowls, the noodles became plump. Of course, it wasn't over yet. Ouyang Qinfeng picked up the minced meat, which had almost turned into fine powder. He sprinkled it into the bowls, and shortly after, it blended into the soup. His hand reached out, and the cicada-winged knife appeared in his hand. He cut a big spirit herb into slices, putting several slices into a bowl, and then put them on a plate. The heaven burial noodles were done. The heaven burial noodles, which everyone had heard so much about, was just a simple bowl of noodles. However, people had seen Ouyang Qinfeng cook, so they knew how much effort he had put into this simple bowl of noodles. Ouyang Qinfeng took a step back, taking off the cloth band on his forehead. His hair cascaded, brushing his face. Ouyang Qinfeng's ice-cold eyes regained their gentleness. His lips curled into a smile as he calmly looked at Bufang. His dish was done. Next it was Bufang's turn. Of course, Bufang didn't know that Ouyang Qinfeng had finished cooking. As a matter of fact, his noodles were almost at the final stage. The heaven burial noodles were sorrowful. People who ate it couldn't help but shed tears, feeling the deep pain of a funeral. It was created by the sorrowful emotion of 99 spirit birds dying in an instant. Bufang decided to fight poison with poison. He didn't want to cook something that could make people happy. Quite the contrary, he wanted to cook something that could make people feel sorrowful. He wanted to make the judges who tasted his food feel sorrowful like a river. Sorrowful noodles. It was the bowl of noodles that Bufang wanted to cook this time. It was a plain noodle dish with ordinary ingredients, but the cooking method was very different. No matter what, it was a noodle with a thick sorrowful emotion. The chef had to feel the sorrow while cooking, sending it to the noodles, making it sorrowful and sorrowful. The black turtle constellation wok floated. Bufang didn't show any emotion, but his eyes had a gleam of sorrow. The wok was burning red. Bufang took 5 spirit beast eggs he had prepared, gently breaking them. The egg juice burst out, falling into the wok. Sizzle! Sizzle! Instantly, the egg aroma rushed up. The aroma assailed their nostrils. However, Bufang still wore a sorrowful face. His emotions were mixed with his mental force, mixing bit by bit. Eventually, it seeped into the dish. Although it was a simple fried egg, it gave off an extraordinary feeling. 5 small steaks were also fried in the oil. The meat on the steaks was shivering, as though the meat was stretching. Of course, it wasn't Taotai meat. The chef's challenge had a rule that the level of the ingredients couldn't be too high. Of course, as chefs, they knew that. If the taste of the ingredients was too good, it would cover the taste of the noodles. Then, this bowl of noodles would be a failure. Thus, under normal circumstances, noodle dishes wouldn't use ingredients that were too high grade. The shining white noodles were in the wok. However, his wok's base was totally different from Ouyang Chinfeng's. At the bottom of the wok, there were a few pieces of spirit herb roots churning, but there was nothing else. What was being boiled was just plain water and soup. However, of course, Bufang wouldn't let the soup be that simple. He took out a crystal jar, removing the lid. Bufang sniffed, and his brows twitched a little. It was a spicy smell that made people feel sad. Bufang sighed, then dropped a drop of abyssal chili sauce into the soup. In just a blink of an eye, the clear soup became fiery red, with a strong spicy smell. And Bufang also added a drop of abyssal chili sauce on the fried egg and the fried steak. The chili sauce smelled good, and it made the dishes emit a different kind of fragrance. After the noodles were put into the wok, they rolled in the soup. After the noodles had a ruddy color, Bufang scooped them up. Water splashed, and the shining white noodles emitted luster and steam. Every time he hit it, the noodles would shake a little. He put the clean noodles into the prepared blue and white porcelain bowl, then covered it with a piece of steak. Finally, he placed the fried egg, which looked a little cute and piping hot, on top of it. In the center of the fried egg, he added a drop of abyssal chili sauce, then sprinkled some chopped green onions. A bowl of overwhelming sadness noodles, which looked so simple, was done. Bufang wiped the water on his hands, looking at the bowl of noodles, his face a little complicated. He liked to cook dishes that made people feel happy, and the mood of the dish was related to the chef's own mood. In order to make this bowl of noodles, Bufang needed to fuse his melancholy emotions into it. Bufang didn't like this kind of sad feeling. He felt that the purpose of cooking was to make the customers feel happy. Thus, Bufang thought that he wouldn't cook this bowl of noodles for the second time. Bufang let out a long breath. Just like that, his first dish was done. As for his next opponent, it was Bufang's turn. Bufang lifted his head, looking at the emotionless Wang Tong, who seemed to be tortured by the passing of time. His half-white, half-black hair was full of vicissitude. At this moment, he was finishing the dish, neither happy nor sad. Rumble! The giant skull kept dashing, and it couldn't stop. Many experts widened their eyes in astonishment as they watched the giant skull collide with them. Which Holy Land did it belong to? With a loud bang, the skull smashed into the ground, plowing a deep ditch, and the soil on the ground was sent flying. However, the skull was still intact. 2 figures crawled out of it. Cough, cough, cough. Little Nien, come out quickly. You've landed perfectly and safely, said Hades Era, standing on the skull's head. Saint Daughter Ziyun emerged from the hole and breathed in the fresh air. Her beautiful face was filled with excitement. Finally, we're here. Young man, you said that there are spicy strips here. Don't deceive eyes' pure feelings. Hades gave Ziyun a sidelong glance. Ziyun's long eyelashes shivered. Big brother Ha, what are you talking about? How could Ziyun deceive you? Without the spicy strips, Ziyun will be yours. Ziyun's words were righteous. Hades Era looked at her with dark circles under his eyes. The corners of his mouth rose. Young man, you wish. The two of them talked to each other, not caring about the surprised gazes of the surrounding experts. It should be known that the experts hovering in the air were existences from the hidden Dragon Royal Court's great sages' lands. They looked at the skull descending from the sky, watching the 2 figures crawl out of it, bickering. All of a sudden, an expert's eyes widened. Oh, isn't that Saint Daughter Ziyun? Why is that little ancestor here? That expert was an almighty existence from the heavenly spring Holy Land. He came here to help the old man take the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. However, before he could do anything, he encountered such a situation. Many people from the other Holy Lands looked at him strangely. The heavenly spring amethyst elder's daughter, Saint Daughter Ziyun? She was pulling a stranger's arm in front of so many people. If Amethyst Elder knew that, would he vomit blood? Everybody knew how precious Amethyst Elder was to his daughter. Chapter 740. Hu Han's eyes widened when he saw the thick god-slaying rod being brandished at him. God-slaying weapon? What the heck? After a long time, that iron puppet had taken out a god-slaying stick from its stomach. They were all members of the Holy Land, and they had the same goal. They were on the same side. Hu Han opened his mouth to scream, but Xiao Bai's ash-gray eyes twinkled. A moment later, the god-slaying stick swung horizontally. The air seemed to burn at this moment. The lines on the god-slaying stick emerged, igniting a blazing flame. A terrifying sense of danger shrouded him instantly. Hu Han didn't think that this iron puppet could give him such a terrifying sense of danger. The god-slaying axe spun, and the red axe head radiated radiant. A sharp aura shot out from the axe head. It was so fast and mighty. After a loud explosion, the void trembled fiercely. Hu Han felt his entire hand go numb at this moment. The web between his thumb and forefinger was in so much pain that it was almost torn. His entire arm was about to be smashed. "We're on the same side," shouted Hu Han. He came to find Chu Chongqing to take revenge. He didn't have time to tangle with a puppet. Moreover, that puppet was holding a god-slaying weapon. At first glance, he knew it was from the Holy Land. They were on the same side. Could they not attack each other? They were all from the Holy Land. They needed to be rational. However, Xiao Bai didn't answer him. What answered him was the god-slaying stick with the sky-piercing flame. Rumble! 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 Xiao Bai's body was ferocious. The armor on his body had sharp protrusions that looked like long sabers. The spikes on his back also jutted out, looking terrifying and savage. Upon closer inspection, Hu Han became more and more apprehensive. That puppet wasn't ordinary at all. Which Holy Land could create such a puppet? It was an existence equal to the divine soul realm with a 6-step soul ladder. Adding the god-slaying stick, it could even fight against a divine soul realm expert with a 7-step soul ladder. Hu Han's power was just so. Don't push your luck. This time, I'm here to find Chu Chongqing to take revenge. If you continue to force me, I'll definitely cut you into 8 pieces. Hu Han roared, and the aura on his body continued to rise. The god-slaying axe in his hand suddenly burst forth with a brilliant brilliance. Chu Chongqing indifferently looked at Hu Han, his face expressionless. Looking for him? This guy might not know that he had become an almighty powerhouse, but in fact, not many powerhouses in the Holy Land knew about it. This was a good opportunity to trick the Holy Land. However, Chu Chongqing wasn't that optimistic. He knew that the Holy Land wouldn't send just one Hu. Since Hu Han dared to attack like this, it was obvious that he had already decided to shed all pretense of cordiality with the Valley of Gluttony. Behind Hu Han, there was definitely a powerful expert overseeing the situation. This time, it was the Valley of Gluttony's true survival crisis. It was a pity that Bufang didn't want to give Xiao Ye to him. Otherwise, he would have brought Xiao Ye to the inheritance land of the Valley of Gluttony. Don't let those greedy bastards from the Holy Lands have any chance. The Valley of Gluttony's inheritance couldn't be given away that easily. If those people wanted the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance, they had to pay a big price. As Chu Chongqing thought about it, the murderous aura in his eyes became colder. Looking at the golden armor guards slaughtering people in the Gluttony God City, the anger in his chest increased. Hu Han had Bu Fang's iron puppet to hold him back. As for those ants, I'll clean them up. Before the almighty experts from the Heavenly Spring Holy Land take action, I'll make the Heavenly Spring Holy Land bleed. After I clean those ants, the chef's challenge in the Gluttony Square should be over. Although Bu Fang's strong, facing the Heaven Burial Face and the Moonset Crying Crow, he won't have a chance. Moreover, Reverie Knife Lu Tao is eyeing him like a tiger watching its prey. Chu Chongqing's eyes twinkled. His white beard and hair fluttered in the wind. After Bu Fang loses the chef's challenge, Xiao Yu will follow me according to our agreement. At that time, I'll take her to the inheritance land. As Chu Chongqing thought that, his eyes became more resolute. A moment later, he took a step forward. His body disappeared from his spot as if he had shrunk the ground to an inch. He dashed toward the golden armor guards who were slaughtering people. Boom! Chu Chongqing suddenly appeared in front of a golden armor guard. It was a golden armor guard at the Divine Soul Realm with a one-step soul ladder. When he saw Chu Chongqing, he was bewildered. He lifted his head, his mind shivering. The murderous aura in Chu Chongqing's eyes rocketed. He slapped him. With a loud bang, the golden armor on the golden armored guard's body instantly burst apart, and his entire head exploded from the slap without any power to resist. He was killed instantly. After killing a golden armor guard with lightning speed, Chu Chongqing didn't care at all. His body moved horizontally one more time. In just a blink of an eye, he turned into shadows and attacked the golden armor guards. As Chu Chongqing was called an almighty, it was easy for him to kill the golden armor guards. In the sky, Hu Han's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The flame of anger in his chest burst out. "You iron puppet! You court death! Chu Chongqing, if you have the guts, fight me to the death!" He held the god-slaying axe with one hand, and the divine energy on the axe head dispersed. However, what he got in response was Chu Chongqing's indifferent smile and White Yi's war god's stick, which had turned into 9 sticks to attack him together. This puppet. Damn it! The more Hu Han fought, the angrier he became. His fighting power was getting stronger, but he was also more frightened. What the heck? Why is this puppet's power increasing? Boom! The war god's stick spun in the air, and Xiao Bai grabbed it. The metal wings on Xiao Bai's back flapped. His ash-gray eyes shot out an incomparably sharp light. The patterns on the war god's stick surged. A moment later, the war god's stick became thicker and bigger in front of people's frightened eyes. The moon fell, crows cried, and frost filled the sky. Wang Tong's face was mournful. The broken jade knife in his hand spun unceasingly. The food ingredients in his hand became fragrant dishes. A glazed bamboo shoot tower was reflected in the blue soup, indistinctly visible. The blue soup emitted cold air like a cold pond in the middle of the night. Under the moonlight it looked like broken gold. There were indeed specks of golden light swirling in the blue soup. It was Wang Tong's specialty, the broken jade knife Wang Tong. He used to be a genius chef on the tablet of gluttony. That year, he had stirred up an uproar, and he even had the chance to become a special grade chef. However, perhaps God was jealous of his talent. When Wang Tong's ambition was high, when he returned to his hometown in glory, his poor wife and daughter's family had been destroyed, and his wife and daughter had died tragically. After that day, Wang Tong's character changed greatly. He massacred the forces that had destroyed his family. After one night, half of his hair turned white, and he returned to the Valley of Gluttony to live in seclusion. His ranking on the tablet of gluttony also dropped as he went into seclusion. Of course, he was still infatuated with his culinary skills, but his culinary skills had become extremely sorrowful. Bu Fang had finished the overwhelming sadness noodles, and he was about to cook a new dish. The overwhelming sadness noodles were served, competing with Ouyang Chenfeng's heaven burial noodles. Everybody was curious and expectant. Bufang's overwhelming sadness face was very ordinary, so ordinary that it made people wonder if this fellow had exhausted his limited abilities. It was because the difficulty of that noodles was really low, and it wasn't like Ouyang Chenfeng's heaven burial noodles, which was so gorgeous that it made people exclaim in admiration. Of course, they didn't jump to conclusions because they weren't sure if there was something else in Bufang's bowl of noodles. When the noodles were served, of course, Bufang didn't think about the noodles anymore. Instead, he focused on the glass bamboo shoots, preparing to cook the second dish. Bufang had prepared this dish. He lifted his head to look at Wang Tong, who was filled with sorrow. Bufang exhaled gently. With Ouyang Chenfeng's heaven burial face, he could choose to fight poison with poison, making the sorrow flow like a river. However, if he chose to fight poison with Wang Tong in the chef's challenge, Bufang would definitely be beaten black and blue. After all, Wang Tong's sorrow was truly too strong, and it had even become a form of his power. A chef with power was a rare existence. Although a chef with power wasn't necessarily better than a special grade chef, when it came to their specialty, they were almost invincible. Even a special grade chef couldn't defeat them. And what Bufang needed to do now was to break Wang Tong's power. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a chance. To break Wang Tong's power, he needed to use his own spear to attack his own shield. Only when the contradiction collided would he have a chance to tear a hole. Since Wang Tong's dish was about sorrow, he had to do it from another aspect. He needed to focus on life. The spring bamboo shoots had thick vitality, which would grow and multiply unceasingly. Bufang wanted to wash away that sorrow. Bufang's eyes flashed with a bright light. His eyes were so bright that Wang Tong, who was immersed in sorrow, couldn't help but feel something. He lifted his head, looking at Bufang in astonishment. Wang Tong's body seemed to have sorrow hovering around him. He looked at Bufang. My sorrow caused my personality to change overnight. Caused half of my hair to turn white. It caused me to condense my own power. What will you use to break my power? Wang Tong faintly murmured as he gently exhaled a breath of air. Then, he didn't mind Bufang anymore. He took out a small porcelain cup, which was filled with a soup made from the gloomy morning dew in the porcelain jar. Swish! The broth was shredded, as if it had turned into a silk thread. It poured down and dripped onto the round blue broth in front of the bamboo shoot tower on the porcelain plate. That broth immediately rippled, specks of multicolored light filled the air. The moonset crow's caw is done. Wang Tong, on the judges' platform. There were only 4 judges left. However, when Wenren Shang saw Chu Chongsheng leave, he shamelessly stepped forward with his body reeking of alcohol. He took a seat and became the 5th judge. In front of them was a bowl of noodles. The clear broth and the blood-red noodles were a ghastly sight to behold, but the smell coming from the noodles made one squint their eyes involuntarily. Ouyang Chenfeng's heaven burial noodles. Moreover, it was the improved version. Wenren Shang knew that Ouyang Chenfeng had used no more than 36 spirit birds to make the heaven burial noodles, which was much less than this time's 99 birds. Apparently, Ouyang Chenfeng had used all of his strength and energy for this chef's challenge. However, he didn't know how it tasted. Wenren Shang picked up his chopsticks, touching them on the table to make them smooth. Then, he picked up the noodles. Swish! Swish! The blood-colored noodles emitted hot steam and were exposed to everyone's faces. The audience in the Glutton Gods building held their breaths, gazing at the projection formation in the sky. The formation was projecting the steaming hot noodles. Slurp! Wenren Shang opened his mouth, sucking hard. The blood-red noodles jumped into his mouth. Chapter 741. Brother Ha! It seems something big is happening inside. We shouldn't get in there. Ziyun looked at Hades' era, speaking gingerly. He stroked his chopsticks, licking his lips. His eyes looked expectant as he picked up Bu Fang's overwhelming sadness noodles and shoved it into his mouth. Old Ling's aura changed instantly. He took a step forward, hovering high in the sky. His eyes were like lightning, looking at a far distance. This was a delicacy that could affect the dishes. It was enough. At this moment, Hades didn't hear Old Ling. His eyes were half opened, with the black circles emerging above them. He gazed at the glutton god city. That familiar feeling. Could it be, not only him, the other judges also did the same. They closed their eyes and felt the sorrow flowing in their mouth. That sorrow made them feel heavy. Yen Yu sneered, his mocking eyes looking at the bowl of noodles. The sorrow of burying the sky and burying the earth made Wenren Shang raise his head, close his eyes, and let out a long breath. They loved him because he was delicious, and they hated him because he was cruel. Apparently, they didn't like this bowl of noodles. When the blood-red noodles entered their mouths, they didn't have the bloody smell they had imagined. Instead, they had a faint fragrance. It wasn't thick, but it was really elegant. Some people even had tears in their eyes. A drop of crystal-clear liquid rolled down their cheek. Oppressive, heavy. Negative energy burst out. Wenren Shang looked at the bowl of noodles in front of him with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. The corners of Wenren Shang's mouth curled into a faint grin. Wenren Shang held the bowl of noodle soup, blowing it gently. Then, he gulped down a mouthful of the soup. Sizzle! The clear soup splashed everywhere. It had begun. What are you afraid of? Follow I. I will show you what true deliciousness is, said Hades. The experts from the other Holy Lands also had sharp eyes. They moved, dashing toward the Valley of Gluttony. It was the aura of the young man who had created the spicy strips, Bu Fang. Thinking about the spicy strips, Hades' era cheered up. Worthy of the Heaven Burial Noodles. Ouyang Chunfeng is worthy of the Noodle King title. Slurp. Right when Old Ling was about to teach Hades' era a lesson, his face became stern. He turned to look at the glutton god city, where a big explosion was happening. As his voice faded, the space beneath Old Ling's feet began to crumble, and his figure became blurry in the air. The adorable poached egg was placed on the surface, covering the entire mouth of the bowl. The poached egg was like a smiling face, gulp gulp. Saint Daughter Zi Yun's expression changed when she heard the old man's tone. Wenren Shang's skin wrinkled. He couldn't help but have goosebumps. The audience was silent. They couldn't understand the sorrow of the Heaven Burial Mask, but they could see the heaviness on the judges' faces. This bowl of noodles was called Melancholy Ecstasy. Where was melancholy and where was ecstasy? Of course, Bu Fang didn't know that his noodles had caused a huge commotion. At this moment, he was fully focused on cooking the dish in his hand. The other judges were also speechless. They didn't know what to say. Spicy strips? No. Indeed, the Heaven Burial Mask was cruel. With a mouthful of broth and a mouthful of noodles, they felt as if they had fallen into the mournful cries of 99 spirit birds before they died. That aura caused all the pores on his body to open up involuntarily, gushing with energy. Old Ling looked at Saint Daughter Zi Yun lovingly. A moment later, his eyes became cold and arrogant. He glanced at Hades indifferently, his eyes assessing him. It was the sorrow of the 99 spirit birds. It was like a big rock pressing on their hearts. The almighty expert took a deep breath. He didn't care about the mocking looks from the other experts around. His body flashed, appearing by Saint Daughter Zi Yun. The others also put down their bowls. Everyone had a solemn expression on their faces. Their silence was filled with solemnity. At this moment, Zi Yun wasn't a fool. She knew that something big was about to happen in the Valley of Gluttony. Wenren Shang swallowed the noodles with his chopsticks. His eyes narrowed. Under the sunlight, the blood-colored noodles emitted a dazzling radiance. It was too beautiful to take in all at once. She suddenly regretted bringing Brother Ha to this troublesome place. And the elders of the Holy Land had bumped into them. "Old Ling, why are you here?" Saint Daughter Ziyun was bewildered when she saw the almighty expert of the heavenly spring Holy Land. She forced a smile. After Wenren Shang had eaten a mouthful of noodles, his entire body stiffened. Thus, he wasn't confident that he could win. He was the almighty expert of the heavenly spring Holy Land. When had he ever been ignored like that? In his elegant manner, a sorrowful aura diffused. Ziyun was bewildered. Seeing Hades leave, she hurried to follow him. As for Old Ling's order, she didn't care. The heavenly spring Holy Land's Saint Daughter was abducted by a nameless kid. This would become a big event in the Holy Land. The sixth elder pressed down the sorrow in his heart, speaking seriously. Since the great elder wasn't here, he would be the host of this event. Old Ling, it's none of Brother Ha's business. That young man didn't lie to him. Bufang was in the Valley of Gluttony, and this place had spicy strips. Looking at the table in front of them, everyone had a strange expression on their faces as they looked at each other. Wenren Shang said. The audience was also in an uproar, whispering to each other. That person's heaven burial noodles were filled with sorrow. You can't just compete with him and give him a facade that doesn't live up to its name. Anyway, this bowl of noodles was so delicious in that direction, Hades' era felt a familiar aura. A moment later, he strode toward the Valley of Gluttony, neither too fast nor too slow. That's interesting, look at your plate. You call it F** King Overwhelming Sorrow? Nether King Ha's lips trembled, and his eyes showed a hint of worry. He was afraid that it was his own misconception. The other experts around also smiled, but they weren't smiling. His eyes gradually widened, and then became bloodshot. Whether it's delicious or not, why are you hesitating? We'll know after eating it. Moreover, we haven't tasted it yet. It's too early to judge. When the heavenly spring Holy Land's almighty expert saw Ziyun quarreling with Hades' era, he almost pulled his beard. All right, it's time for Bufang's dish. As soon as the broth entered his mouth, the faint aroma of meat burst out. The clear broth looked bland, but it had an extremely thick meaty flavor. This kid, Ziyun? Oh, my great aunt! Why are you here? Old Ling's words weren't polite at all. His voice had the pressure of a superior being. However, Old Ling's face didn't change. He gazed at Hades. Ziyun, stay here. Don't run around. Wait for me, Old Ling said seriously. That familiar aura. Is it the delicious spicy strips? He knew that Bufang's noodles weren't as simple as they looked. The days without spicy strips were really lonely. Now that he could taste spicy strips, he was a little excited. He had slaughtered 99 spirit birds with his own hands to cook a dish. This bowl of noodles. This sister wants to cry, said Mu Qing, wiping her eyes with her slender, white hand. Noodle King Ouyang Qinfeng looked at her, then turned his head to look at the judges. It was a dish that people loved and hated at the same time. In just a short while, the noisy place became deserted. Only Ziyun and Nether King Ha were left. She didn't expect to meet an almighty expert from the Holy Land here. If Old Ling insisted on taking her back, she couldn't struggle. No matter what, Old Ling was an almighty expert. He was much stronger than her father's clone. Who are you? What's your purpose in approaching the heavenly spring Holy Land, Saintess? It should be called silly smiling funny noodles, right? He needed this dish to tear Wang Tong's power. At this moment, she had already prepared to run away. The sound of something being pulled was clearly heard by everyone. His body was surrounded by thick mental energy. His spirit sea seemed to be boiling. This is so F** King sad. At this moment, Old Ling's face was ashen. If Amethyst Elder saw this scene, it would be terrible. Also, who was this kid? His guts were too big. He even dared to flirt with Amethyst Elder's daughter. Amethyst Elder would slap him until he became a retard. The others nodded in agreement. Was this kid ignoring him? The surrounding experts all emitted a powerful aura. Some of them stood on their flying swords, while others emitted a dazzling light, walking in the air. Chapter 742. What the F***ck? I'm really overwhelmed with sadness. When Wenren Shang took the first bite of the noodles, his face stiffened. He was a little bewildered, and his eyes showed that he couldn't believe it. The taste that made him shiver was spreading from the tip of his tongue. The coldness that penetrated his heart expanded instantly, covering his entire body. At that moment, he felt like a volcano was about to erupt. That feeling made his blood surge furiously. However, what did it have to do with ecstasy? However, why did the noodles taste so good? 1 bite, 2 bites, 3 bites, slurp, slurp. Wenren Shang simply couldn't stop. His hands didn't stop moving as he kept shoving the noodles into his mouth. The white noodles had a faint aroma of wine, and the special grilled spirit beast steak made him feel like he was about to eat. The oily juice of the steak seeped into the slender noodles, which made the noodles taste explosively change in just a blink of an eye. His hair seemed to be standing on end. However, it wasn't over yet. Wenren Shang took another bite of the steak. His eyes widened, and in just a blink of an eye, they were filled with veins. Those veins looked ferocious, and at that moment, the scene seemed to shrink and enlarge along with his pupils. A drop of crystal-clear tears appeared in Wenren Shang's eyes, accumulating more and more. Eventually, like a broken dam, they gushed out. Tears rolled down his cheeks, dripping on the noodles in Wenren Shang's hands. It was a spicy taste that could make his taste buds explode. It was an emotion that made Wenren Shang recall many things. He recalled the scene when he cooked for the first time. At that time, he was so naive and romantic. When he swung the kitchen knife, he had the courage to cook the sky, cook the earth, and cook the universe. At that time, he was so stupid. He had to face so many setbacks. Now, those setbacks were enlarging in his eyes, and they kept appearing in his memory. While chewing, tears rolled down his cheeks silently. Wenren Shang's face blushed, and he exhaled a breath of hot air. His nose twitched. King sadness, King ecstasy. He took a bite of the cute poached egg. The perfectly fried poached egg was crystal clear and cute. It was pink and tender and full of elasticity. However, it was only 1 bite. Wenren Shang's eyes narrowed. His entire body felt soft, and his pores opened as if they were releasing hot air. This soul-stirring poached egg reminded him of his lost youth and beauty. It was like a loving egg between lovers when they woke up. Oh my God! This feeling is so enjoyable. Wenren Shang shoved the entire fried egg into his mouth. As he chewed, he realized that a spicy taste had spread in his mouth. This spicy flavor burst out uncontrollably. Wenren Shang felt the overwhelming sadness while tears streamed down his face. He reached out to wipe his tears. What the hell? Why are my tears not stopping? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. When people saw Wenren Shang's current posture, they couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. Am I seeing things? Chef Wenren. Is he crying? Is he crying like a little kid? He's crying because he ate the overwhelming sadness noodles? How could this noodles be so terrifying? The diners looked at Wenren Shang's red face and tears rolling down his face. They were shaken, whispering to each other to express the shock in their hearts. A bowl of noodles had made a chef cry. It was truly overwhelming sadness. It seemed to be more effective than Ouyang Noodle King's Heaven Burial noodles. The other judges gawked and dropped their jaws. They looked at Wenren Shang, who had just eaten a few mouthfuls of noodles and then cried like a little kid whose toy was taken away. They were bewildered. They turned around, looking at the steaming bowls of overwhelming sadness noodles in front of them. They gulped their saliva. Since it could make Wenren Shang cry after eating it, perhaps there was something special about it. Hence, the rest of the judges picked up the overwhelming sorrow noodles, which looked like a street snack, and started to eat it. The first bite was in the mouth. The other judges were bewildered. They exchanged looks and saw the shock and disbelief in each other's eyes. Their taste buds were surrounded by a delicious aroma, and all kinds of flavors came one after another, making their taste buds feel overwhelmed. The oily juice of the steak mixed with the thick aroma of the noodle soup, teasing their nostrils. They couldn't help but take a deep breath. However, as soon as they inhaled, a spicy aroma burst out. Taking a bite of the white noodles, the faint aroma of wine mixed with the aroma of the flour made people feel intoxicated. The sorrow from eating the heaven burial noodles was completely washed away at this moment. Was it a bowl of noodles that could make people happy? Wrong. They were all wrong. They took a bite of the steak and a bite of the poached egg. At this moment, people's eyes became deep and blurry, as if they had recalled many things that made them intoxicated and sink in. The sixth elder's handlebar mustache twitched continuously. His eyes were blurry, and the wrinkles on his face were shaking. His face reddened and tears rolled in his eyes. He took another bite of the poached egg, and his tears rolled down like a broken dam. While eating this bowl of noodles, the sixth elder recalled his first love. When he had just joined the chef's profession, they had become a couple. That girl's food also had this familiar taste. However, time passed quickly and the years grew old. Now they only had sad memories. With swollen lips, the sixth elder exhaled. Turbid tears rolled down his cheeks. Mu Cheng's face reddened. A bite of noodles, a piece of meat, and an egg, the combination of these three things made her shiver. Her face blushed, and her fair skin seemed to be stained with a layer of pink. It was really mesmerizing. Yeah. Mu Cheng snorted as she breathed. She bit her red lips, and her eyes became misty. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and her eyes became wet. Her long thighs clenched. Countless scenes flashed through his mind. After a long time, he laid his head on the dining table and burst into tears. Why was this noodle so delicious? The judges' performance had completely stunned the audience. They dropped their jaws as if they could stuff a perfectly round egg inside. They didn't know what to say or looking at the crying judges, they could only stay silent and shocked. Ouyang Chenfeng's face had become ashen. The judge's performance was beyond his estimation. He seemed to have foreseen the result. As a chef who had a restaurant, he could tell the quality of the food from the customers' reactions. Although his heaven burial noodles had amazed the judges, it couldn't change their emotions that much. Was he going to lose? A moment later, the judges also wiped away their tears and finished the overwhelming sorrow noodles. Although their lips were red and swollen and their eyes were blurred, Ouyang Chenfeng's heart sank even more because of the sadness in their hearts. Now, announce the result, the sixth elder said with a heavy heart. He took a deep breath and his lips shivered. This noodle was good, but it was too spicy. However, that spiciness made them unable to control themselves. The spiciness was just right, and it made their emotions burst. Thus, they didn't know if they were crying because of the spiciness or because they were moved. As the sixth elder's voice faded, people's eyes fell on Ouyang Chenfeng. They held their breaths, looking forward to the result. Who would be the winner? Boom! Boom! The thick war god stick swept across the void. At this moment, the sky trembled violently as if it was about to be shattered by the long stick. Xiao Bai's ash-gray eyes twinkled. His palm-leaf-sized palm pressed on the war god's stick. His energy burst out. The long stick hissed, smashing toward Hu Han. Hu Han was enraged. His hair fluttered as he gripped the god-slaying axe with both hands, fighting bravely. The opponent's god-slaying stick made him not dare to be careless. He raised the axe horizontally, trying to stop the god-slaying stick's attack. The god-slaying stick, which had become so big, pounded on the god-slaying axe. Both weapons glowed. The god-slaying axe's divine power surged unceasingly, its power expanding. However, Hu Han's heart palpitated more and more as he realized that his body was being continuously pushed back by the long rod. The ground was scratched by his feet, and crushed stones were piled up. All of a sudden, the war god's stick shrank. Hu Han felt so suffocated. His body staggered. A majestic figure with pressure dashed over. His palm leaf-sized palm slapped instantly. Hu Han roared. He wanted to swing the god-slaying axe, but a long stick that was as red as a soldering iron was pressing down on his axe head. No matter how much strength he used, he couldn't shake off that long stick. The soul ladder emerged above his head, blooming with extreme radiance. Boom! However, Hu Han was dumbstruck shortly after, because just as he was doing his best to resist, a slap suddenly greeted his face. With a bang, Hu Han's entire body was smashed and he staggered backwards. The expression on his face was a little perplexed. Xiao Bai's strike had succeeded. He wanted to take your life while you were down. He swung his fist again, smashing the dumbfounded Hu Han into the air. The soul ladder above his head also shattered. Xiao Bai loved hand-to-hand combat the most. The long stick pounded, pressing down the god-slaying axe. At the same time, Xiao Bai lifted Hu Han with one hand. With a ripping sound, he violently tore his clothes, sending rags everywhere. Hu Han vomited blood as he was sent flying backward. Finally, he pulled himself together, his eyes filled with shame and anger. I'm going to risk my life with you. The clothes on his body were torn off, leaving only a pair of underwear. This was the most embarrassing thing. Hu Han's anger surged. His face, which had become red and swollen from Little White's slap, was filled with anger. He shot out and actually fought Little White in close combat. Just like that, a man and a puppet began to fight at close quarters. Every punch hit flesh. Each strike was sonorous. Boom! The man and the puppet's fists hit each other. Hu Han's arms shivered. He felt a heart-tearing pain. He retreated, but Xiao Bai was still approaching him. This unkillable puppet caused Hu Han's heart to tremble. However, Xiao Bai had fought crazily. How could he let Hu Han run away like that? The metal wings on his back shook. Instantly, countless flying knives shot up into the sky and fell. The knives hit the ground, blocking Hu Han's way out. Then, Hu Han couldn't resist at all. He was beaten up. He couldn't beat the puppet, and he couldn't resist. Hu Han felt that it was the most humiliating thing in his life. Even losing to Chu Chongqing wasn't as humiliating as this. This puppet was simply his nightmare, sent by the heavens to torture him. Swoosh! Blood gushed from Hu Han's nostrils. His bones were almost broken. He lay on the ground, coughing blood from time to time. He didn't want to live anymore. Xiao Bai looked ferocious. Although he had many holes, his gray eyes were so cold. He swung the war god's stick, hovering in front of Hu Han's head. His other hand was holding the god-slaying axe that used to belong to Hu Han. Boom! Boom! Outside, a majestic aura suddenly erupted. An expert's figure violently rushed over, causing the void to tremble from the impact. How dare you! You dare to hurt the heavenly spring Holy Land's people. You dare to steal the god-slaying axe of our heavenly spring Holy Land. You deserve to die 10,000 times. Rumble! A deafening roar arose. After Chu Chongqing crushed a golden armor guard's head, his eyes focused, looking at a far distance. His face was solemn. The heavenly spring Holy Land's Almighty has finally appeared. Chapter 743. The Almighty experts could tear the void and travel through it. Their cultivation base was really strong. They were the peak existences in the divine soul realm. Of course, the Almighty experts were divided into realms. After all, the divine soul with an 8-step soul ladder could be called an Almighty. The divine soul with a 9-step soul ladder was also an Almighty. Moreover, they were the strongest among the Almighty. As for the peak existences among the Almighty, they were at the half-step divine soul realm. However, those existences were really rare in the Holy Land. Chu Chongqing's eyes were bright. His aura was rising unceasingly. He looked at the figure walking in the air. That figure was the almighty expert of the heavenly spring Holy Land. An almighty expert at the divine soul with an 8-step soul ladder. Although he was the lowest almighty, the heavenly spring Holy Land had sent such an existence to the Valley of Gluttony. It showed their determination. This time, they really wanted to take the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. However, how could Chu Chongqing let them take the inheritance that easily? Did they think that sending an almighty expert with an 8-step soul ladder would make the Valley of Gluttony bow down? The heavenly spring Holy Land didn't put the Valley of Gluttony in their eyes. Buzz Old Ling's face was cold. He took one step forward, and the void trembled like flowers in the mirror or the moon in the water. He clasped his hands, looking high and mighty. His aura was majestic. It was the pride of an almighty existence. He looked at Hu Han, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog. He looked at Hu Han, who was coughing up blood and had a weak aura. His aura became more and more terrifying. Amethyst Elder, you have foresight. This trip to the Valley of Gluttony isn't that simple. Hu Han, that trash, has messed things up one more time. Luckily, I'm here this time. Old Ling's eyes sparkled. He clapped his hand. Instantly, outside the city, 3 figures clad in golden armor stormed over. It was actually the existence of the 3 Jinjiawi protectors. Old Ling had summoned these 3 golden armor guards. No matter what, each of them was an existence that was infinitely close to the almighty level. Their existence was enough to flatten the entire Valley of Gluttony. Old Ling's shout made Xiao Bai slightly stunned. He held the god-slaying axe in one hand and looked at Old Ling, who was walking in the air from afar. A moment later, Xiao Bai's stomach spun, and a massive black hole emerged. Xiao Bai grabbed the god-slaying axe and shoved it into the black hole. Elder Ling was furious. "How dare you, puppet!" A thunderous roar exploded. In the air, tens of thousands of energy converged, transforming into a huge energy palm. That palm stretched across the sky, slapping down on Xiao Bai. The weather changed and thunder exploded. Xiao Bai's movements did not stop as he continued to stuff the god-slaying axe in. As soon as it touched the god-slaying axe, the black hole began to twist, and cracks appeared on the axe. When the experts who rushed over saw this scene, their pupils shrank and they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. What was this puppet trying to do? Swallowed the god-slaying weapon? Many experts' minds shrank. Among them, there were almighty experts, but most of them were experts who controlled the god-slaying weapons of their holy lands. Their goal this time was the same as the heavenly spring Holy Land, which was to obtain the inheritance. If they could get the inheritance, their holy lands would be more magnificent. However, they didn't care as much as the heavenly spring Holy Land, which had sent so many experts. 3 golden armored protectors, an expert who wielded a god-slaying weapon, and a powerful being. No, wait a minute. The heavenly spring Holy Land's saintess was kidnapped. Crack, crack, as people shuddered, the god-slaying axe shattered, turning into pieces and entering the black hole in Xiao Bai's stomach. Xiao Bai's eyes twinkled. His aura became extremely terrifying. Die! Old Ling was so enraged. It swallowed the god-slaying axe? Just who gave this puppet the guts to do this? However, under Old Ling's deadly palm his face changed. A figure tore through the air, shaking off the bloodstains that belonged to the golden armor guards in his hands. His figure soared into the sky, and the clothes on his body were instantly torn apart, revealing a body of strong muscles. This man was the almighty Chu Chongqing, who had successfully entered the divine soul realm with an 8-step soul ladder. Chu Chongqing roared, his hair standing on end. His white beard and eyebrows fluttered in the wind. He punched the void. Countless beams of energy congregated, creating a massive fist. That fist soared, colliding with the big palm. An earth-shaking explosion occurred. Boom! Rumble! Waves of tyrannical ripples spread out in all directions, raising a cloud of dust that filled the sky. Everything became a little blurry. After one strike, Chu Chongqing's muscular body stood proudly in the void, releasing a terrifying pressure. The energy palm exploded, and Chu Chongqing's fist vanished. The two of them faced each other in the void. Their eyes were as sharp as lightning, and sparks flew everywhere. Chu Chongqing? Chu Chongqing of the Valley of Gluttony? You want to stop me? Old Ling said coldly. However, Chu Chongqing's reply was just a long roar from him. Chu Chongqing's body seemed to radiate light. He was a little excited. Since he had broken through to the Almighty Realm, it was the first time he had used all of his power to attack. His body crossed the sky, dashing like lightning toward Old Ling, who was standing proudly in the void. Buzz! The three protectors clad in golden armor immediately stood in front of Chu Chongqing. Their scarlet eyes shot out light as the long sabers in their hands slashed horizontally. They wanted to kill Chu Chongqing. 3 golden armor protectors at the divine soul realm with a 7-step soul ladder. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to face them head-on. However, Chu Chongqing dared. Facing the 3 of them, Chu Chongqing didn't retreat. He chose to crush them. The muscles on his arms bulged like dragons. Chu Chongqing shouted, grabbing a long saber slashing toward him. The long saber slashed in his hand, sending sparks everywhere. The saber energy crisscrossed as if it wanted to chop Chu Chongqing into pieces. Humph! Chu Chongqing roared, and a saber light emerged. A kitchen knife with 2 handles flew out, hissing and tearing everything apart. Dang! The 2 golden-armored protectors were sent flying. He had also subdued one. Clenching his fists, countless wisps of true energy congregated on his fist. Then, he pounded on the protector's head. Boom! The golden armor protector broke. The golden-armored protector, who was struggling, let out a furious roar. His helmet cracked, revealing a ferocious beast's face. The beast's face was already covered in blood. Chu Chongqing was that strong? The Heavenly Spring Holy Land's information was wrong. Chu Chongqing had been pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. His real cultivation base was that of an almighty. The Valley of Gluttony had an almighty existence. In the sky, Old Ling stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes shrank. He had never thought that Chu Chongqing, who had attacked like lightning, was an almighty. To be able to crush the 3 golden-armored protectors so easily, there was no one else other than a powerful being. Swoosh! Chu Chongqing's eyes were cold. His white hair and eyebrows bulged. His muscles bulged as he restrained the protector whose helmet had been smashed. He punched the protector's face again and again. Thudding sounds echoed unceasingly. The protector struggled for a long time. Eventually, he couldn't resist anymore. His head was smashed. He was completely dead. The remaining 2 protectors let out sorrowful howls. His eyes turned bloodshot. The 13 protectors were like brothers. Even one of them died. It was an extremely sad and indignant matter. This human must die. Old Ling also roared. He was enraged. A black, domineering dagger axe appeared in his hand. That dagger axe was so cold and murderous, emitting a cold aura. When it was swung, the void seemed to be cut and shattered. It wasn't a god-slaying weapon, but its power wasn't weaker than a god-slaying weapon. At this moment, Xiao Bai had completely swallowed the god-slaying axe. Light flashed in his mechanical eyes, and his body stiffened. The black hole closed. Xiao Bai stood at his spot, not moving an inch. Xiaopi lay on Xiao Bai's round head, blinking her big eyes. You've just become an almighty, and you killed a protector of my holy land. Chu Chongqing, you deserve to die. Old Ling took a step forward. The void cracked, and in just a blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Chu Chongqing. There was a tearing sound. The 2 kitchen knives spun and flew over. Chu Chongqing caught them, slashing them horizontally, clashing with the dagger axe. True Qi burst forth, and a terrifying energy ripple spread out in a circle. From a distance, The experts from the Holy Lands frowned, watching the battle in the square. Chu Chongqing had the cultivation base of an almighty. This was a big deal. They were lucky that they found it early. If they had found it later, they would have lost a lot of people. Thinking about this, many people took in a breath of cold air. Worthy of being the Valley of Gluttony. A centipede would die, but it wouldn't fall down. It did have some foundation. Those experts wore solemn faces. All of a sudden, their faces changed. Their gazes fell on the puppet in the distance. It was a puppet with a god-slaying weapon. Many people were curious. Was it the Valley of Gluttony's trump card? All of a sudden, an expert moved. A sword light tore the sky, slashing toward Xiao Bai in just a blink of an eye. It was an expert from the Heavens Pivot Holy Land. That sword light came with thick divine energy, slashing directly at Xiao Bai. As that expert had taken action, many experts also attacked Xiao Bai. If they wanted to break the Valley of Gluttony, they would cut off Chu Chongqing's right-hand man first. Beams of light from the god-slaying weapons bloomed, slashing toward Xiao Bai. Chu Chongqing coldly looked at them. Exhaling, he continued to fight with Old Ling. The two of them fought from the ground to the sky. Shrimpy, who had been coiled on Whitey's head, suddenly turned into a golden color and scuttled out. Its body suddenly enlarged, and it let out a roar as it faced the countless attacks descending from the sky. Xiao Bai's silent mechanical eyes moved. His ash-white eyes were wild and brutal. God-slaying weapon detected. Kill. Hades strode forward. Shortly, he entered the Gluttony God City, which was now a pile of ruins. The battle in front of him was grand and imposing. The terrifying air waves brought crushed rocks, which shattered before they could reach his body. Saint Daughter Ziyun, who was following him, was frightened. All of a sudden, Hades' era halted. Ziyun accidentally bumped into him. She was so scared that her face reddened. She took a step backward. "Brother Ha, you're so bad," Ziyun said. Hades' era squinted with dark circles under his eyes. He indifferently glanced at her. "This young man has a problem," his nose twitched. Then, he looked surprised. He reached out his hand and placed it on Ziyun's shoulder. "Found it. Follow I." Ziyun was bewildered. A moment later, she didn't have time to refuse. Everything in front of her changed in just a blink of an eye. The void cracked. They were moving through the void, they walked out of the void. A thick aroma assailed their nostrils. Ziyun was dumbfounded. He looked around and saw so many people staring at them, who had just appeared out of nowhere. What happened just now? Where are we? Chapter 744. Bufang let out a long breath. His eyes gradually focused, and his entire aura became dreamy at this moment. The vermilion robe on his body fluttered, and between the alternating red and white, there was a hazy radiance that appeared. His mental force was highly concentrated. After finishing a bowl of overwhelming sadness noodles, his spirit sea was still in a boiling state, and his aura was unceasingly attacking. Cooking this kind of chef's challenge dish required a lot of mental force. It was because he had to do it meticulously, and he couldn't make any mistakes. After all, once he failed, it meant that he would lose his beloved kitchen knife and his qualification to be a chef. To any chef, it would be a huge blow to them. Bufang didn't know which side would win the battle between the overwhelming sadness noodles and the heaven burial noodles. At this moment, he had already started to prepare the next dish. Broken Jade Knife Wang Tong had a kitchen knife that was close to a famous knife. His cooking level was really intimidating, and the aura condensed from his body made Bufang's heart skip a beat. If he couldn't break Wang Tong's aura, Bufang would probably lose. It was the first time Bufang had such a feeling after cooking for so long. Tilting his head, Bufang lifted his head to look at Wang Tong. The aura around him was as stagnant as water, which made people's breaths heavy. At this moment, Wang Tong had finished his dish. The next dish, Crying Moonset Crow, It was vivid and lifelike, just like a beautiful painting. That sparkling and translucent bamboo shoot tower was so beautiful that it was suffocating. That light blue soup, that trembling golden splendor in the soup. It was beautiful and desolate, which matched Wang Tong's aura. It was almost perfect. Wang Tong carried his dish, walking out of the stove. The audience, who were originally immersed in the miraculous counterattack of the overwhelming sadness mask, immediately regained their senses. When they saw this scene, everyone felt their hearts calm down as they quietly looked at the lonely, sorrowful, and frail figure. The light from the projection formation shone on that dish. Everybody saw the crying moonset crow, and they held their breath. All that was left in his eyes was shock. Ouyang Chunfeng's face was deathly pale. He had been defeated. He had actually been defeated in the field of noodles that he was best at. At this moment, his entire body was trembling, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Ouyang Chunfeng took 2 steps back, then took off his neat chef hat. He took a deep breath, and then let out a long breath, as if he was letting out a breath of depression that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time. Did he still lose in the end? Ouyang Chunfeng looked at Bufang, who was standing on the stove far away, concentrating on cooking the next dish. There were 3 of them in the chef's challenge, but he was the first one to be eliminated. Although Ouyang Chunfeng felt lonely, he did not blame Bufang. Instead, he was looking forward to it. They hoped that Bufang could create a miracle. Although the Valley of Gluttony was the holy land of chefs, the chefs on the tablet of gluttony had been quiet for a long time. They were lifeless, and they had lost the splendor of the Valley of Gluttony's glorious days. Today, Bufang's appearance could be an opportunity to revive them, and it could bring the Valley of Gluttony back to its glorious days. He hoped that Bufang could create a miracle. Ouyang Chunfeng's face revealed an unsightly smile, his eyes looking at Bufang. Suddenly, his eyes focused. He felt a wave of terrifying aura. That aura enveloped him, making him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. His entire body stiffened, and he felt really uncomfortable. It was Wang Tong. That aura was really terrifying. Of course, Ouyang Chunfeng had heard about Wang Tong. Although he did not know much about Wang Tong, and he did not have much contact with him, he still admired him. Wang Tong seemed to feel Ouyang Chunfeng's gaze. He lifted his head, his eyes deep. After nodding, he continued to walk forward. The dish's aroma was ethereal. Although it tickled the taste buds, it was incomparably fragrant. However, one couldn't help but feel lonely and sorrowful. Just by smelling this aroma, Ouyang Chunfeng knew that his heaven burial noodles weren't as good as this dish. Although they both walked the path of sorrow, the other's sorrow was more thorough than his. Such a powerful opponent. What would Bufang use to defeat the other? Ouyang Chunfeng thought. Wang Tong took a few steps forward. All of a sudden, everybody burst into an uproar. This was because the void in front of them was actually distorted out of nowhere. A ripple spread out, and then 2 figures emerged from the blurry void. One of them had black hair and black eyes, wearing a warrior's robe. He was so handsome and dashing. The other person was a graceful woman. She exuded a heroic spirit, and her face was extremely beautiful. Especially her head of purple hair, it was even more eye-catching. Everyone's gazes were originally on Wang Tong, who was slowly walking forward. But as the 2 figures appeared, everyone's gazes turned and landed on them. That man and woman, who had broken the void without fear. Who were they? Wang Tong halted. His eyes were like a pool of stagnant water, looking at Saint Daughter Ziyun and Hades' era. Ziyun was bewildered. She didn't know where they were or why there were so many people around them. Moreover, they were looking at them as if they were looking at some rare spirit beast. Did they appear in the wrong way? Looking around, she saw many tall buildings with many people's heads on them. In the sky above her head, there was a massive projection formation, which projected her and Era's faces. Ziyun was bewildered. A moment later, she adjusted her makeup. In the projection formation, she also adjusted her makeup. Instantly, she was surprised. Of course, Hades' era wasn't the same. He was a man who had seen the world. Although he was curious about where they were, his nose kept moving. Very quickly, his gaze locked onto a direction. When he looked over, he saw Bufang, who was concentrating on cooking. "Oh, it's that young man, Bufang. Finally, I found him." Hades was so excited. His face was filled with joy. He didn't expect that Bufang would be here. He didn't expect that the funny woman he had picked up along the way could recognize the way. It wasn't easy at all. Hades smacked his lips. As soon as he saw Bufang, he couldn't help but think of the spicy strip. At this moment, the delicious spicy strip had appeared in front of his eyes, emitting an aroma that came from the deep abyss. He couldn't resist the attack of the spicy strip. Hades' era's eyes were blurry. He strode toward Bufang. Wang Tong held the moonset crow caw, his eyes like stagnant water. Nether King Er Ha flicked his elegant hair as he strode forward. However, they stood in front of Wang Tong, blocking each other's way, for Wang Tong's eyes were like stagnant water as he took a step to the left. Hades had dark circles under his eyes. He also took a step to the left. The two of them blocked each other's way, or Wang Tong glanced at Hades, taking a step to the right. Hades seemed to have a telepathic connection with him, taking a step back. This funny scene fell into everybody's sight. At this moment, someone finally burst out. "Who's that funny woman? Are they planning to steal Chef Wang Tong's dish halfway? Too much. How could there be such a shameless person in this world? Is he flirting with Chef Wang Tong?" Their chatter had made the quiet glutton god's building square burst into an earth-shaking uproar. Hades' era was enraged. Anyone who stood in his way of the spicy strip wasn't a good person. He should slap them to death. "Young man, you're so naughty. Are you flirting with I? Let me tell you. I'm a man with a dream." The Nether King's body leaned forward, and his almost perfect and handsome face instantly moved forward, almost reaching Wang Tong's face. The two of them seemed to be able to smell each other's breath. "Get lost." Wang Tong's face darkened. "Naughty." Hades curled his lips. He extended his hand, gently patting Wang Tong's head. Wang Tong was petrified. The momentum that was originally maintained collapsed at this moment. Because he could feel an even more terrifying momentum from the man in front of him. "Troublemaker! Guards, take this troublemaker away." Yen couldn't stand it anymore. He slapped the table, his face cold and stern. Hades retracted his head. He glanced at Yen and sneered. Then, he walked past Wang Tong, rubbing his hands as he walked toward Bufang. Bufang took out a spicy strip from the system-dimensional bag. It was the main ingredient of his dish. If he wanted to break Wang Tong's sorrowful momentum, he would have to rely on this spicy strip. And the moment Hades saw the spicy strip, he was no longer depressed. The dark circles under his eyes disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Little Boo, you know me the best." Hades's black hair fluttered in the wind as he shouted at Bufang. A moment later, his entire body seemed to float. Swinging his hands, he dashed toward Bufang. "You're the wind and I'm the sand. Crazy to the ends of the earth." However, Bufang didn't notice Hades at all. The dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand spun, slashing down. The knife light flashed, and the spicy strip was cut into small pieces. The knife spun, lifting the spicy strip into the wok. The steam swirled, sweeping away the remaining smell of the spicy strip in the air. Hades's dashing body froze. A moment later, he screamed sorrowfully. "Eyes spicy strip." Chapter 745. Roar. An ear-piercing roar reverberated. Xiao Opi's body suddenly enlarged, and the golden shell on his body sparkled under the sunlight. His body enlarged, and his eyes became more ferocious with the special ruthlessness of spirit beasts. Numerous energy beams and attacks rained down from the sky. It seemed as if they wanted to destroy everything in their path. That fluctuation was extremely violent, and even the void showed faint signs of cracking. Xiao Bai's eyes moved for a while. Facing so many terrifying attacks from the sky, he didn't move at all. He didn't even want to dodge. He just stood at his spot, bewildered. The god-slaying sword energy slashed grumblingly. Terrifying saber energy diffused and boomed. Arrow light, flying knives and spears. At this moment, all kinds of attacks were aimed at Xiao Bai. This group of people wanted to kill Xiao Bai completely. In their eyes, Xiao Bai was Chu Chongqing's right-hand man. Such a powerful puppet was infinitely close to the almighty level. If they could kill him, it would be a big blow to Chu Chongqing. Chu Chongqing felt it was a little tricky. If Xiao Bai was killed like that, it wouldn't benefit him at all. He and Old Ling, the almighty of the heavenly spring Holy Land, were fighting from the ground to the sky. Their true energy was like a dragon, and each flow of true energy was surging and surging. The rumbling caused the void to tremble. It was a battle between almighty experts. Even heaven and earth would change because of it. The light in Xiao Bai's eyes twinkled more fiercely. After swallowing a god-slaying weapon, Xiao Bai's fighting competence had increased a little. However, this process needed time. Buzz light flashed. A moment later, a jet of gold light fled. Xiao Bai stood on Xiao Opi's back, and the two of them dodged the attack. Boom, boom, boom. So many attacks hit the place where Xiao Bai and Xiao Opi were standing. At this moment, the entire ground caved in. Rubble flew everywhere and the ground collapsed. Up in the sky, Chu Chongqing held a unique kitchen knife in his hand, slashing unceasingly at Old Ling. His aura was like a rainbow. At this moment, he was actually suppressing his opponent. His physical body was strong and his physical strength was invincible. Even though he had just become an almighty, he could still suppress a veteran almighty. The entire Glutton God City seemed to shake at this moment. Everyone in the Taotai Square finally sensed it, and they were a little dumbfounded. What happened? How could there be such a violent tremor? The entire Gluttony Square seemed to shake. Many people felt a terrifying pressure pressing down on their hearts. They, who were originally tempted by the delicacies, were completely shocked at this moment. Many people rushed out of their respective positions, intending to investigate the situation outside. However, as soon as they came out, they saw a scene that terrified them. Countless attacks rumbled in the sky, chasing after a golden light. Above the golden light, an iron puppet stood proudly. Rumble! Rumble! The void exploded unceasingly. Many experts with intimidating auras were chasing after that iron puppet. Their attacks scattered everywhere, shattering the surroundings unceasingly. What was going on? Enemy attack? Everybody took in a breath of cold air. They felt as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A strong enemy was attacking the Valley of Gluttony. Some people with sharp eyes saw more terrifying energy fluctuations in the sky. It seemed to be the collision between almighty experts. The void twisted unceasingly. That kind of battle made people take in deep breath. The Glutton God City looked like it was full of holes and holes. Countless corpses lay everywhere. Fresh blood spread out and covered the entire city. Everyone fell silent as an indescribable sorrow surged in their hearts. Xiao Bai and Xiaopi were chased by so many experts. Those experts wanted to kill Xiao Bai. However, Xiaopi was too fast. He was like a jet of gold light that crossed the sky unceasingly. In just a blink of an eye, he disappeared. This caused the attacks of those experts to basically miss the target. The Heavens Pivot Holy Land's experts were enraged. They wielded their god-slaying weapons, chasing after him. The divine symbols on the god-slaying weapons radiated light. This kind of energy fluctuation was really terrifying. Rumble! Rumble! The battle between the almighty experts in the sky seemed to reach its climax. Old Ling rolled his eyes, holding the god-slaying weapon in one hand. His eyes were filled with brutality. He couldn't kill Chu Chongqing. Chu Chongqing was even suppressing him. It was unforgivable. He was an almighty expert of the heavenly spring holy land. A long roar echoed. Old Ling's aura changed dramatically. A light dot shot out from his glabella. A milky white soul ladder condensed above his head. Each step of the soul ladder looked real. 8 steps of the soul ladder. At the top of the soul ladder, a dazzling star bloomed and shone. After getting the heavenly spring star's light, Old Ling's power had become stronger. His spear swept horizontally, and instantly, the sky was filled with spear light. It almost swallowed Chu Chongqing's entire body, wanting to pierce him with thousands of holes. It was like a peacock spreading its tail. Its murderous aura was beautiful. Chu Chongqing's eyes focused. He roared, and the energy in his body burst out one more time. A black mark emerged on his forehead, covering his entire body in just a blink of an eye. His fighting capacity rocketed. The kitchen knife slashed, spinning fast. It seemed to turn into a tornado that could sweep the entire world. It collided with thousands of spear lights. Boom, boom, boom. Old Ling retreated several steps in the sky. His face grimaced. He had planned to use his power to suppress the other. However, he found that his power wasn't as strong as the others. This made him feel a little embarrassed. The kitchen knife spun, shining dazzlingly. Chu Chongqing held the knife, his body emitting steam. The black marks covered his entire body, which made him look so ferocious. Come. Don't you want to destroy my valley of gluttony? If you have the guts, then step over my dead body. Chu Chongqing's eyes were strange and evil. His white hair had turned black, and he looked much younger. His vitality was boundless. Old Ling's face was cold, and he was so angry. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out from the ground. The arrow buzzed as if it had transformed into a beam of light that shot forward in an instant. At that moment, Chu Chongqing felt an extreme danger. He stomped his foot, and the void shook as if he wanted to shatter the arrow. However, the arrow was still as steady as Mount Tai, bringing with it a terrifying power. That arrow must be shot by an almighty expert. Chu Chongqing made up his mind. His body flashed, and in just a blink of an eye, he had moved a distance away. Swoosh! Blood splashed in the sky. Chu Chongqing's eyes shrank. He couldn't believe it. He looked at the bloody hole on his shoulder, where the arrow had pierced through him. Blood was gushing from the wound. How could he not dodge it? He had dodged it. Chu Chongqing felt a chill in his heart. His eyes shot out like lightning, looking at the one who had shot the arrow. It was a man wearing a conical bamboo hat, and his entire body was wrapped in a black robe. The beautiful bow in his hand was so mesmerizing. Old Ling also saw that man, exhaling in relief. Wavering light holy land, exterminating sun Bao Chun Tsang. The Wavering Light Holy Land was one of the 7 great sage lands of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court. Moreover, the one in front of him was an almighty from the Wavering Light Holy Land. He was the second almighty expert who had flattened the Valley of Gluttony. The Wavering Light Holy Land had 3 bows: exterminating sun, setting sun, and shooting sun. The owners of the bows were almighty, and they were 3 brothers. Each of them was really strong. The owner of the shooting sun, Bao, was a famous god archer in the Hidden Dragon continent. Rumors said that he could shoot down the stars in the sky. Of course, this might very well be an exaggeration. However, this also showed how powerful these 3 brothers were. As the Wavering Light Holy Land had sent such experts here, it seemed like they wanted to get the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. The bamboo hat was lifted, revealing a gentle face. Chen Tsang, the Wavering Light Holy Land's expert, had a warm face that gave people a feeling of a spring breeze. He nodded to Chu Chongqing and Old Ling. A moment later, He pulled the bow and shot the arrow one more time. Swoosh! In that instant the radiance seemed to tear the world. Boom! Chu Changxing's shoulder exploded one more time. Blood splashed in the sky. Chu Changxing's mouth was bleeding. He took several steps backward, his face extremely stern. Two almighty experts besieged him. It seemed like he wouldn't have a good ending this time. Down below, Xiaopi took Xiaobai, fleeing everywhere to avoid the attacks of those experts. At this moment, Xiaobai was still brewing the god-slaying weapon he had just swallowed. The ash-gray light in his eyes twinkled unceasingly, as if he was still evolving and leveling up. Buzz, all of a sudden, Shrimpy, who had been running away all this time, suddenly stopped. It slowly turned around. The people chasing after him were bewildered, looking at Mantis Shrimp and the puppet in astonishment. A moment later, Mantis Shrimp turned around. The black hole in the belly of Xiao Bai's puppet emerged, spinning unceasingly. A red-hot iron stick slowly emerged from it. Sizzle! 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 Xiao Bai's fan-like big hand grabbed the war god stick. After the war god stick had evolved, the divine marks on it became more complicated. When Whitey completely took out the war god stick, Whitey's eyes widened. The light in his mechanical eyes stabilized. Standing on Mantis Shrimp's back, Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes were cold and indifferent. God-slaying weapon detected. Kill. Buzz then, under the astonished gazes of all the experts, Xiao Bai rode Mantis Shrimp, launching a counterattack. The war god stick swept horizontally, and one end of the stick rose rapidly. Hades's face was filled with pain. He bit his lower lip, running to Bufang's stove with tears in his eyes. How could he treat the spicy strip like that? This kind of delicacy needed to be savored carefully. This barbaric treatment was disrespectful to the delicacy. Bufang was startled by Hades, who had run to his stove. What was going on? Wasn't that little Ha, whom he hadn't seen for a long time? Why was he here? Bufang stopped what he was doing, looking at Hades' Era indifferently. Era's tearful eyes met Bufang's. After a few seconds, Era retreated in defeat, looking away. Old Boo, you're really shameless. Treating the spicy strip like that isn't right. Hades' Era said seriously. Bufang looked at him, his brows arching. Then what do you think is right? Bufang asked. Give me a spicy strip and I'll show you. Era's eyes brightened as he said. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. A moment later, he took out a spicy strip from the system-dimensional bag. Era couldn't wait, reaching out his hand. However, he saw a flash of knife light. The chili strips were chopped into fine powder. The dragon bone kitchen knife patted, and the spicy strips fell into the black turtle constellation wok, swallowed by the boiling water. You want a spicy strip? Wait until I'm done with this chef's challenge. Now, please stay away from the stove. Otherwise, the consequences will be severe, Bufang said, his face emotionless. Hades looked at the boiling black turtle constellation wok, which emitted the enchanting aroma of the spicy strip. His eyes narrowed and his mind flickered. Then, he strode forward with big step. It was as though he had shrunk the ground to an inch, appearing in the middle of the judge's table. Yenyu felt a chill run down his spine. A moment later, he realized that an arm was placed on his shoulder. I heard that you want to chase me away? Hades' Era's dark circles reappeared as he said faintly. Yenyu's body stiffened. He was enraged as he turned around, looking at Hades with eyes as sharp as lightning. Chase me away. Who do you think you are? Hades said nonchalantly. He raised his hand, flicking a finger at Yenyu's glabella. Instantly, with a loud bang, Yenyu felt an irresistible force explode. His entire body was blown away, smashing into the wall of the gluttony square. Crushed stones rolled down. The audience that had yet to leave the gluttony square gawked and dropped their jaws. The judges have changed. Let's continue. Hades clapped his hands, sitting down majestically. Then, he turned to the beautiful Mu Cheng and asked, The judges can eat Little Boo's dishes, right? Mu Cheng was bewildered. Instinctively, she nodded. He could send Yan Yu flying with just a finger. What kind of power did he have? Also, did this fellow know how to evaluate dishes? Chapter 746. That kid wanted to be a judge? Everyone was stunned. They didn't know why this guy, who had suddenly appeared and sent Yan Yu flying with one finger, was going to replace Yan Yu as the referee. What was that guy doing? With one look, they knew that he didn't know how to judge a dish. Compared to Yan Yu, this guy being a judge was an insult to the judges. Boom! Yan Yu dashed out from the rubble. His face was ferocious and his eyes were red. His forehead was swollen and he was panting heavily. However, he didn't dare to move. To be able to send him flying with one finger, it was enough to prove that the handsome man in front of him had extraordinary strength. Perhaps only an existence like the Great Elder could deal with him. However, he wasn't willing to give up his position as a judge. Who was he? He was Yan Yu, a special grade chef. In the entire Valley of Gluttony, he was one of the best chefs. How could he bear such humiliation? Yan Yu, of course, was unwilling. However, looking at Hades' Era, who was lying on his seat, he didn't dare to say anything. He didn't dare to ask someone to chase that guy away. He was really scared. Thus, he turned around and looked at Wenren Shang. Wenren Shang wasn't a judge. He just occupied the Great Elder's position. Now that there was another overbearing person, it was time for Wenren Shang to get lost. Hence, Yan Yu strode toward Wenren Shang. Wenren Shang, give up your position. Let me be the judge. This kind of commanding tone, this kind of arrogant tone, made Wenren Shang squint his eyes. He took out a bamboo tube, poured out the wine, and slowly drank it. Xiao Chen glanced at Yan Yu, who was walking like a shooting star, and remained indifferent. His entire person was incomparably lazy as he snorted and ignored Yan Yu. You! Yan Yu was instantly enraged. He thought that with his status, Wenren Shang would obediently accept, but Wenren Shang's attitude really made him angry. Wenren Shang, don't burn yourself. Offending me won't end well, said Yan Yu coldly. Carefully drinking the wine, Wenren Shang put down the tube, his mouth curving into a disdainful smile. Get lost. Don't think that being the first chef of the Tablet of Gluttony is something great. I won't buy it. Someone else took your position, and you want to mess with me. Are you sick? Wenren Shang rolled his eyes. Yan Yu's face darkened. He gave Wenren Shang a deep look. Eventually, he turned around and left. As he was the first chef of the Tablet of Gluttony, he didn't say anything. This kind of silent departure was even more chilling than the kind of departure that was clamorous and cursing. Wenren Shang's back, Wenren Shang's face. Wenren Shang looked at Yan Shang's figure. Bu Fang. That it to say he and it to it you shen and you and look to go. That bamboo shoot was tender and tender. It sparkled brilliantly as if it had been soaked in the soup, which made it even more beautiful. From that bamboo shoot, Shi Yan could feel waves of majestic vitality. The vitality flooded over, making the bamboo shoot's fragrance reach its peak. At the same time, it also had the thick aroma of the spicy strip. Bu Fang took a deep breath, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. He took out several chili strips from the system's dimensional storage and minced them. After fiddling with the minced chili strips for a while, the dragon bone kitchen knife in Bu Fang's hand began to spin. The knife slashed, cutting the bamboo shoot. He put the spicy strips inside, then closed the bamboo shoot. However, he found that the bamboo shoot was flawless, without a single crack. Because his knife was so fast, the bamboo shoot didn't seem to be cut at all. It was the performance of Bu Fang's meteor knife skill. Bu Fang picked up a piece of spirit beast meat and diced it. He also chopped up many of the supplementary ingredients that he had prepared beforehand. The preparations were done. Fang scooped out half a ladle of the abyssal chili sauce, which was stored in a crystal jar. Not much, just half a ladle. Then, the black turtle constellation wok was heated up. The heaven and earth obsidian flame entered the wok. Oil was added and the temperature rose. Fang poured in the ingredient. In an instant, sizzling sounds resounded, and thick smoke and fragrance rose. Boom, boom, boom. While stir-frying, sparks appeared. Fang's expression was calm, but the movements of his hands were extremely skillful. He continuously shook the wok, causing the ingredients inside to churn. When he poured the ladle of abyssal chili sauce into the wok, the sparks became fiercer. It was like a wild lion, opening its mouth and letting out a deafening roar. And it wasn't over yet. He picked up the translucent jade bamboo shoot and cut it horizontally with his kitchen knife. Immediately, the jade bamboo shoot was cut into pieces. He wasn't planning to cook an exquisite dish like wonton. Instead, he was planning to cook a dish to break wonton's momentum. If he wanted to break the power, he had to use the spear to attack the shield. Wonton's power was a condensed sorrow, and Fang wanted to use the endless growth of the bamboo shoot to break it. The bamboo shoot originally had such a meaning. So, with Fang's meticulous cooking, it was a good opportunity. Piece by piece, the jade bamboo shoots fell into the blazing wok, swallowed by the flames, and then swept away. The center of the bamboo shoots was mixed with the chili strip, and it looked like the two were one. It was a novelty. Finally, after stir-frying it, a layer of soup was poured over it. Sizzling sounds of steam arose. In the next moment, a mellow and rich fragrance flowed out. Inside the wok, within the dense steam, the dish was trembling. That dish was overflowing with light, and it had a layer of enchanting luster. It was really beautiful. Taking a clean blue and white porcelain plate, Fang spun it in his palm. Then, he held it in front of him. He shook the wok. The steaming hot dish was scooped out of the wok, and it was poured onto the blue and white porcelain plate. The thick soup flowed out and it was full of vitality. Fang took out a portion of crystal source purple essence, and he carefully dripped a drop on it. That drop of crystal source purple essence instantly merged with the dish, becoming one with it. The fragrance that wafted out seemed to have changed a lot. The thick vitality seemed to be mixed with a surging essence energy. It's finally done. It's full of vitality. Let's call it myriad living things. Fang looked at the blue and white porcelain plate in his hand, and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. Then, he muttered to himself. Myriad living things symbolized the growth of all living things in spring, and the feeling of leveling up filled the air. Compared to the stir-frying dish in front of him, although the name was a little more elegant, the cooking method of this dish was very violent. Because it was stir-frying with a high flame, the dish was cooked in an instant, and the spirit energy it contained was also very rich. The hidden vitality was the mystery of this dish. With the addition of the chili strip soup and the chili strip filling, the chili strip, which could make people full of energy after eating it, made this dish even more perfect. Fang's dish was finished. He carried the steaming hot dish, walked out of the stove, and walked toward the judges' table. When he saw Hades, who was sitting calmly among the judges, his brows instantly twitched. How did this guy become a judge? Moreover, why did he look so relaxed? When the steaming hot dish was placed on the table, the heat waves rolled and condensed in the sky. Endless vitality burst out, making people feel a little dizzy. Wang Tong stood beside Fang. Of course, he also saw Fang's dish. Although there was a look of surprise in his eyes, he was still calm and unperturbed like an ancient well. His aura was broken by Hades's slap, but the aura of his dish was still there. If he wanted to defeat Wang Tong's moonset crow, Fang's myriad living things must completely break the aura of his dish. The sixth elder looked at the two opposing dishes, rubbing his mustache. Then, he waved his hand and said, "Then, let's taste it now." The sixth elder said. Then, the judges picked up their chopsticks, preparing to taste the dish. "We have to taste this dish first because it's served first." Mu Qing saw that Hades's chopsticks were about to grab Bufang's myriad living things, so she hurried to stop him. Hades was bewildered. He didn't know what to do. However, he came here to be a judge just to eat Bufang's dish. To be precise, he came here to taste the spicy strips in the dish. He was really lonely without the spicy strip. That was why he needed the spicy strip. He couldn't wait for even a second, all right, since everyone wants to eat this dish first, then this king will reluctantly give it a try. Hades wrinkled his nose, saying. Then, he turned his chopsticks, which were reaching toward the moonset crow, toward the moonset crow. The moonset crow's sparkling bamboo shoot tower was actually made of densely packed bamboo shoot. It was sparkling, translucent, and very beautiful. Hades picked up a few, dipped them in the light blue gravy, and put them into his mouth. As soon as the dish entered his mouth, the exquisite taste of the bamboo shoots burst out instantly. It was like dark clouds covering the originally clear sky, which made his cheerful heart feel very heavy. He seemed to feel the chef's sorrow. If it were an ordinary person, after eating this dish, they would fall into the atmosphere created by the dish, unable to extricate themselves. What's this thing? Compared to the spicy strips, it's just trash. Hades ate a mouthful of the spicy strip. Then, he slammed his chopsticks on the table, snorting discontentedly. He was really dissatisfied. Compared to the other judges, who were intoxicated with sorrow, he was simply an anomaly. What's the meaning of the concept in this dish? That kind of sorrowful aura actually merged into a dish. Young man, why don't you ascend to the heavens? The purpose of a dish's existence is to satisfy the diners and make them happy. Era wasn't afraid to touch this kind of dish that was filled with sorrow. The others also exchanged looks. They were a little speechless. Wang Tong's dish could be said to be almost perfect. Then, it was Bufang's myriad things grow. The projection array reflected the piping hot dish. The scene was extremely exquisite, and it was shrouded in smoke. It was vivid and lifelike, causing many people to exclaim in admiration. Hades's mouth watered. Spicy strips. He could smell the thick aroma of the spicy strips. In front of the spicy strips, everything else was trash. All of a sudden, just as people were about to taste the dish, the ground shook. Everybody's mind was shaken. A moment later, a fierce explosion occurred on one side of the Gluttony Gods building. Smoke and dust rolled, and debris scattered everywhere. Along with a desperate roar, a figure was shot backward, landing in the middle of the two stoves in the Gluttony Gods building's square. Everybody was bewildered at the sudden change. A moment later, they turned to see the big hole in the Gluttony Gods building. Two figures emerged there. One was holding a halberd, while the other was holding a longbow. Their auras shot out, rolling up thousands of storms. Their overbearing murderous auras aimed at Chu Chongqing, who was lying on the ground. Chapter 747. Blood filled the sky, and the thick smell of blood diffused. Chu Chongqing struggled to get up from the ground. His entire body was covered in bloody holes. Some of them had even pierced through his body, revealing his ferocious white bones. However, he was still an almighty expert. Even if his body was broken and full of holes, his eyes were still cold and sharp. He stood up, his eyes like lightning, looking at the two people hovering in the sky. The heavenly spring Holy Land and the wavering light Holy Land had attacked the Valley of Gluttony at the same time. They had both sent almighty experts. It seemed like God wanted to destroy the Valley of Gluttony. Chu Chongqing felt a little tired. The Valley of Gluttony had gradually declined, and now they were being humiliated. It should be known that when the Valley of Gluttony was at its peak, no Holy Land dared to treat it like that. At that time, the Valley of Gluttony had enough experts to subdue half of the hidden dragon royal court. Any Holy Land would have to bow down to them. The Valley Master of the Valley of Gluttony was dignified even in front of the saint sovereigns of the great sage lands. Chu Chongqing's body was bleak and broken. Blood splashed everywhere. He looked around with a desperate face. The Valley of Gluttony today was no longer as glorious as it was in its heyday. Even the last hope of the inheritance was about to be taken away. Sorrow, despair, all of them flooded Chu Chongqing's heart. Tui. Chu Chongqing spat out a mouthful of blood, his face ashen. At this moment, the Gluttony Square quieted down. Everybody was dumbstruck. This sudden change was beyond everyone's expectation. That man with so many bloody holes. Was he the Great Elder? How could he be the Great Elder? He was the pillar of the Valley of Gluttony. Many people's faces were filled with fear. How could something like this happen? The Great Elder was actually beaten up to such a state, and his body was covered in blood. Bufang furrowed his brows, looking at the Great Elder. Then he lifted his head to look at the two people holding a halberd and a longbow on their back. Their auras were so fierce that they suppressed the entire place. Chu Chongqing, you don't have a chance anymore. The Valley of Gluttony has declined. Why do you still want to protect something you can't protect? Old Ling said coldly as he waved his halberd, creating a terrifying shockwave. His voice swept across the entire place, causing everyone to tremble in fear. Look, you're fighting a bloody battle to the death outside, but what are you doing here? He's actually cooking? Why do you need to protect this Valley of Gluttony? Even if I give you the inheritance, you will still be defeated. Old Ling said. Shut up. Chu Chongqing's body staggered. His white hair and beard were dyed with blood, turning scarlet. He opened his mouth and roared angrily, his hair and beard standing on end. Old Ling's expression instantly changed. Then it became eerie. You're courting death. Why do you think I'm keeping you alive? It was for that inheritance. If it wasn't for that inheritance, you would have been dead by now. The man in the bamboo hat from the Yaoguang Holy Land looked indifferent. He placed his hand on the longbow, raised it, and pulled it back. A buzzing sound rang out, and in the next moment, a sonic boom erupted in the void. That bow hadn't shot an arrow, but it had already shaken the void. It was worthy of being the treasure bow of the Yaoguang Holy Land. Stop talking nonsense. Shoot him half dead. Hang him up and beat him slowly. Then you can tell me everything, said exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song indifferently, his voice ruthless. A moment later, light gathered in his hand, forming an arrow. Swish. His hand loosened, and the sound of the bowstring being pulled tore the air. Boom. Rumble. It was like thunder exploding in people's ears. Everybody was bewildered. They felt that the light in front of them wanted to tear everything, which made them shiver. Chu Chongqing's eyes shrank. It was all because of this exterminating sun bow. If it weren't for this bow, he wouldn't have been pushed to this point. Damn it! Chu Chongqing gritted his teeth. True energy surged in his body, but he felt so helpless. Blood flowed out of the bloody hole, causing his strength to slightly collapse. That majestic and terrifying arrow, he had no way of blocking it. Was he going to die? He was unwilling. The Valley of Gluttony was going to be destroyed in his hands. Everybody held their breaths. At this moment, their faces grimaced. Deep in their eyes, despair arose. In the next moment, the pillar of the Valley of Gluttony, the great elder Chu Chongqing, was going to be mercilessly shot to death. All of a sudden, the terrifying arrow stopped. It didn't explode. Some people had closed their eyes in despair, as they didn't want to see Chu Chongqing's blood splashing. However, they found that the scene they had imagined didn't happen. Chu Chongqing's hair and beard fluttered. He rolled his eyes, looking at the figure in front of him. Nether King Erha's dark eyes widened, and his eyes were filled with rage. He stretched out his hand, spreading his fingers to grab the light arrow, causing the terrifying light arrow to be unable to advance even an inch. Do you know how long I've waited for my spicy strips? Do you know how much hardship I had to go across the sea just to get my spicy strips? Do you know how angry I am when I'm about to eat my spicy strips? Hades' arrow was enraged. His chopsticks had almost reached the spicy strip in his myriad things grow. However, this group of people had completely disrupted the judge's rhythm. He could only watch helplessly as Bufang picked up the myriad living being again. That feeling of wanting something but not being able to get it would make a pig climb a tree. After each sentence Hades said, the power in his hand increased. A moment later, the light arrow was crushed, turning into tens of thousands of wisps of energy, scattering. Hades' arrow's hair fluttered in the wind, his handsome face was so dazzling under the light. Everybody was dumbstruck, or rather, dumbstruck. No one had thought that that unknown man would suddenly take action and save the great elder. Was the man who had chased away Yen Yu their savior? Some people suddenly had hope in their hearts. Saint Daughter Ziyun's face was intoxicated. Looking at Nether King Erha's handsome face and the cool moves he made, her face blushed. Brother Ha, you're awesome. Hades exhaled, rolling his eyes. His warrior robe puffed up as he flipped his hair. All of you, remember this. Wait until this king finishes tasting this dish. Otherwise, I will crush everything you have just like how I crushed that thing just now. The Nether King grinned. Presumptuous. Old Ling's face was cold as he shouted. He took in a breath of cold air. He had never thought that the one who had taken action was this man, the kid who had kidnapped Saint Daughter Ziyun. How could this kid still have the face to show up here? Moreover, he could stop exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song's arrow. It was the wavering light Holy Land's exterminating Sun Bao. When the arrow was shot, its power was so immense that even the almighty experts would feel threatened. Old man, say that again? The Nether King raised his head and glared at Old Ling with dark circles under his eyes. Old Ling's face froze. He wanted to say something, but it got stuck in his throat. Exterminating Sun Baochen Song's eyes were cold and indifferent. You can stop my exterminating Sun Baochen Song's attack. You should be proud. However, anyone who stops me will die. Today, no one can save this old man. The Valley of Gluttony will be destroyed. Arrogant. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and their eyes were filled with boundless anger. Why did this man want to kill their Valley of Gluttony? Sizzle. Sizzle. Light sparkled one more time. Exterminating Sun Baochen Song raised the longbow in his hand one more time, releasing a terrifying pressure. An 8-step soul ladder emerged above his head. At the top of the soul ladder, an alcade star shone, projecting beams of light. Boom. Rumble. The void seemed to distort. The arrow of light seemed to have materialized, and the densely packed patterns on it circulated and covered it. The sound of thunder, the roar of beasts, and the explosion of the earth were all deafening. Alcade Curse Arrow. Exterminating Sun Baochen Song roared. His fingers on the bow loosened. The sound of a bowstring snapping resounded. Instantly, a long arrow shot out, distorting the space around it. That arrow was so dazzling. Countless beams of light shot out, creating a massive, sky-high vortex. Hades' arrow lifted his head, squinting to look at the arrow in the void. He gently spat. Youngsters these days. So naughty. Hades said. A moment later, black nether energy shot out from his body, filling the sky. The nether aura swept out and formed an illusory figure behind Erha. That illusory figure was indomitable, covering everything. For a split second, everything seemed to darken. That phantom was so high up in the sky. It was so dark that people couldn't see its appearance. It only had one eye, which looked like a demon king awakening from the abyss. It was like a terrifying existence that could control everything had revived. With just one glance from Hades, the sky and the earth could shatter. Everyone felt as if their hearts had frozen. The light arrow shattered in just a blink of an eye. Their minds were submerged. Ziyun covered her mouth, her face disbelieving. Bufang's eyes twitched. He was so surprised, the others were dumbstruck. Chu Chongqing, who was standing behind Hades, felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At first glance at that phantom, he felt dazzled. He was frightened. What kind of existence was that? This phantom came and went quickly. Everyone felt as if the phantom had never appeared and had already disappeared. However, the light arrow had vanished. Exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song was shivering. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, as if there was an oppressive lightning dragon surging within it. However, as the phantom disappeared, the thunder dragon also disappeared. Boom! While everybody was still in shock, the Gluttony God's building exploded one more time. A war god's stick that looked like a burning iron swung from the outside, pounding on Old Ling and exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song, who were caught off guard. Due to the shock of the Nether King's might, the two of them were sent flying in a moment of carelessness. However, this also allowed everyone to recover from their previous shock. They lifted their heads to look. The figure that had released the terrifying phantom had returned to the judge's table. He rubbed his hands, looking at the dish in Bufang's hand. Outside the Gluttony God's building, rocks rolled. A streak of golden light rushed over in an instant. The other end of the rolling metal was caught by a giant, ferocious figure. Xiao Bai was holding several god-slaying weapons in his hands. He stepped on Xiaopi's back, slowly emerging. Chapter 748. What happened in the chef's challenge was beyond people's imagination. Even Bufang was a little bewildered. He held the fragrant myriad living things in his hand, looking at the figures who had smashed the Gluttony God's building. Of course, there was also Xiao Bai, who was holding the Iron War God's stick and stepping on a gold shrimpy. He frowned. Those people had disrupted the order of the chef's challenge, which made it hard for the chef's challenge to continue. Bufang felt a little irritated. He hadn't expected that the clown, Hades era, would also come. Wasn't he taken away the last time? Did he escape again? He glanced at Air Ha and found that the previously awe-inspiring Air Ha had already scurried over to the judge's table and was looking at him eagerly, his mouth open and mouth drooling as he stared at the all things grow in his hand. He glanced at the two experts whom Xiao Bai had smashed down from the sky. Then, he exhaled gently. He placed the myriad living things on the table. Taste it. Give me the result. Let's continue the chef's challenge. Bufang said with an emotionless face. His voice was calm. The sixth elder's handlebar mustache rose. He had almost pulled it off himself. How could this fellow be so calm? Don't you see what the Valley of Gluttony is facing? Look at the great elder. He's about to fall. We don't have the mood to taste your dish. The sixth elder said with a sorrowful face. Mu Cheng and the others also looked worried. The Valley of Gluttony belonged to them, after all. Once it fell, they would suffer a calamity too. Bufang looked at them indifferently. He was still so calm. I need the result of the chef's challenge. Wang Tong's half-white, half-black hair fluttered. Even though something like that had happened, he was still calm, his face unchanged. He just curiously looked at Bufang's myriad living things. This dish had made him shiver and his eyes focused. That rich life energy, that endless fluctuation of energy. This dish has some tricks up its sleeves. Just by sensing the vitality in the dish, his skin was covered with goosebumps. Spring bamboo shoots were full of vitality, so it was normal for it to make dishes that were full of vitality. However, this life force was simply too dense. The judges' attitudes were tough. Now that these strong enemies had invaded the Valley of Gluttony, it was something they could not tolerate. They had to get up and defend, even if there was nothing they could do. In the distance, Chu Chongqing was shaking. His body had so many bloody holes, which made people shiver in fear. He coughed up blood and his body was covered in blood. However, his eyes were still as resolute as ever. He seemed to feel hope. He staggered a few steps back, and his gaze landed on the pretty Xiaoya in the distance. Xiaoya stood at the side, hugging a large pillar. Her big eyes were filled with spirituality. Owner Bu, no matter what happens in the chef's challenge, can you take Xiaoya with me? The Valley of Gluttony doesn't have much time left. Xiaoya is really important to me and the entire Valley of Gluttony. Chu Chongqing weakly turned his head to look at Bufang. His face and white beard were stained with blood. As arrogant as he was, his pale, paper-like face looked like he was begging. The great elder of the Valley of Gluttony, an extremely arrogant man, was begging. Bufang was bewildered. The corners of his mouth twitched. He put down the dish in his hand, gently sighing. He took off the velvet rope that tied his hair. After the velvet rope was taken off, his hair scattered. You can take Xiaoya, but I hope you won't do anything to hurt her. Anyway, the chef's challenge still needs to continue. Let them decide the final result. Bufang said casually. Chu Chongqing's eyes, which were filled with despair, were now filled with endless vitality. Bufang agreed? Cough, cough, cough. Coughing blood, Chu Chongqing was so excited that he twisted his body. His body, which was full of bloody holes, couldn't bear it anymore. Blood gushed out. Good, good. Thank you, Owner Bu. Our Valley of Gluttony will remember this favor. Chu Chongqing roared. Since you're the judges, the chef's challenge hasn't ended yet. You can't give up. Taste the dishes and give the final result to this chef's challenge. Chu Chongqing said, looking at the sixth elder and the others. The sixth elder and the others shivered inwardly, their faces solemn. They nodded and looked at Bufang with complicated eyes. This little chef could actually make the arrogant great elder lower his head and show a pleading look. Indeed, he wasn't ordinary. Hurry up. Don't babble. Let's eat. Hades' era couldn't wait anymore. He grinned, his chopsticks shaking. Mu Cheng and the others were speechless. Ziyun rubbed his forehead. Compared to the domineering expert who could break light arrows with just a glance, this fellow was like the difference between heaven and earth. Boom, boom, rumble. Inside the ruins, two figures stood up unscathed. The heavenly spring Holy Land's almighty old Ling held a halberd, his face so dark that it could drip water. Exterminating Sun Bao Chun Song panted, his eyes so cold. Qi activity circulated around their bodies, causing crushed rocks to tumble down one after another. The two of them raised their heads and their gazes landed on Whitey, who was holding the god-slaying rod and stepping on Shrimpy. This iron puppet, which they had never paid any attention to, had actually taken advantage of their unpreparedness to give them a sneak attack. It had struck them down from the sky. Their faces were utterly shameful, unforgivable. Xiao Bai's ash-gray mechanical eyes twinkled. His body looked ferocious, sharp. He held several god-slaying weapons in his hands, which belonged to the enemies who had chased after him. And now those weapons were in his hands. Outside the Gluttony Gods building, the ground was full of ruins. There was a hazy mist in the ruins, and there were even broken pieces of cloth slowly falling from the sky. The ground was filled with screams and groans. Some people staggered to get up from the ground. They were naked, their faces pale, and they were coughing blood. Their clothes were ripped off, and they were almost smashed to death by a stick. Their god-slaying weapons were snatched. This was King Doksh T. They didn't know what kind of perverted puppet they had encountered. Not only did it take people's weapons, but it also tore their clothes. If they didn't have life-saving techniques, they would have been smashed to death by that god-slaying weapon that was as hot as iron. Their faces were filled with resentment. They took clothes from their spatial spirit tools, putting them on. Then, they fled to the Gluttony Gods building. The battle inside had just begun. They wanted to see that iron puppet be punished with their own eyes. Holding the war god stick in one hand, one end of the stick had become so big. After the stick had smashed the two of them away, the war god's stick shrunk to its normal size. With a clanging sound, Xiao Bai spun the war god's stick around, stabbing it into his back. 2 sharp thorns clamped down on the war god's stick. Then, he took the god-slaying weapon from his other hand. Xiao Bai's eyes twinkled. There were 3 god-slaying weapons in this place. After swallowing them, Xiao Bai could level up one more time. Although these god-slaying weapons weren't of a high grade, and were a few levels lower than the god-slaying axe Xiao Bai had swallowed, they had a lot of them. Quantity could cause quality to change. Just a puppet. Trash like an ant die. Old Ling's eyes were cold. He roared, holding the halberd in his hand. Several meters around him rose up, and his true energy swept out. He stomped on the ground, and the ground collapsed. His body was sent flying. The halberd swept horizontally, and a terrifying gust of wind came grumblingly. Old Ling directly stormed toward Xiao Bai. Exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song's face was cold. However, his target wasn't Xiao Bai. Although Xiao Bai had smashed him with the stick, at this moment, he wanted to make Chu Chongqing hand over the inheritance. In the sky, Xiao Bai's ash-gray eyes twinkled. Instantly, a black hole spun on his round belly. Xiao Bai shoved a god-slaying weapon into that hole. Instantly, that weapon was smashed. Divine energy diffused everywhere, and Xiao Bai quickly absorbed it. Seeing Old Ling dashing toward him, the spikes on Xiao Bai's body became more ferocious. His fan-like hand rose, grabbing the war god's stick. Then, Xiao Bai stomped on the gold shrimp's back. Xiao Bai's eyes brightened. Then, he turned into a jet of gold light, turning around to run away. His speed was as fast as lightning, as if he could break the sky. Exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song coldly looked at Chu Chongqing. Do you think they can save you? Chu Chongqing. It's useless. Hand over the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. Chen Song pulled his bow, taking a step forward, aiming at Chu Chongqing, who had so many holes on his body. The light arrows congregated. A moment later, 3 light arrows shot toward Chu Chongqing. They were so fast that they created sonic booms and exploded the air. Chu Chongqing's eyes shrank. He wanted to dodge, but he couldn't. Swoosh. Blood splashed. Chu Chongqing's staggering body was shot one more time. A light arrow pierced through his body, nailing him to the ground. Chu Chongqing held the light arrow, gasping for his breath. This arrow had almost torn his body apart. Swish. The other 2 light arrows didn't slow down. They shot toward the judge's table with thunderous sounds and immense energy. Exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song coldly gazed at Hades' arrow. These 2 arrows were to test him. The terrifying pressure and strength that the Nether King had displayed for a brief moment had caused his entire body to stiffen, and he felt his heart palpitate a little. That kind of power. Logically, it shouldn't belong to this world. Thus, these 2 arrows were to test that fellow's real power. Was he just trying to be mysterious, or did he really have the real power? These 2 arrows, he would know. Swish. Whistling sounds could be heard, as the terrifying might cause the void to tremble. The 2 light arrows caused Bufang's hair to flutter in the wind. He furrowed his brows and turned his head to look. Exterminating Sun Bao Chen Song's eyes widened. Blood streaks gathered in his pupils. He reached out his hand, spreading his fingers. Then, he squeezed. Instantly, the 2 sweeping light arrows collided with each other, turning into a single light arrow, heading straight for Nether King Ha. At this moment, Hades' era's chopsticks were shivering. It had been a long time. Finally, he could taste this delicious spicy strip. Although he didn't eat the spicy strip directly, even if it was a dish with the flavor of the spicy strip, he still couldn't help himself. His chopsticks were getting closer and closer. His chopsticks fell, picking up a piece of bamboo shoot meat that was as clear as jade. Through the meat, he could see the steaming, oily, spicy strip. Oh my God! The Nether King took a deep breath, and his eyes became misty. All of a sudden, he felt a terrifying gust of wind attacking him. He couldn't help but lift up his head. That light arrow was dazzling and dazzling. Hades was bewildered when he saw it. Then, he was enraged. Can't you let I eat my food? Do you want to make things difficult for I? Young people nowadays all like to court death that much? He opened his hand, his 5 fingers shooting, directly grabbing the light arrow with overflowing energy. Explosions echoed unceasingly, but the light arrow couldn't move forward anymore. Exterminating Sun Bao Chun Song's heart shrank when he saw that. Through the light arrow, he saw a pair of eyes that were so cold, as if they had stepped on thousands of corpses. Those eyes, exterminating Sun Bao Chun Song didn't say anything. He turned around and fled. Chapter 749. Young people nowadays, why do they want to court death so much? When Hades' era said that, exterminating Sun Bao Chun Song didn't say anything. He turned around and didn't leave, because he saw a pair of eyes shooting through the light arrow. Those eyes caused his mind to sway. He was incomparably terrified. That gaze made him feel a sense of danger. Thus, he didn't hesitate to turn around and leave. No matter how he looked at it, that young man in front of him wasn't someone he could resist. The other could catch his exterminating Sun Bao with just one hand. Not to mention him, even his second brother couldn't resist that attack. That was why he had to run away. He was afraid of death. Perhaps only his big brother, an existence at the half-step divine spirit realm, could deal with him. That man, even if he wasn't a sect master at the divine spirit realm, was at least a top expert at the half-step divine realm. That kind of almighty expert was the top expert even in the Holy Lands. Hades' era grabbed the light arrow, talking coldly. A moment later, his eyes rolled. Nether energy shot out from his body. The light arrow shot back at a faster speed, aiming at exterminating Sun Bao Chun Song. Chun Song felt the whistling sound behind him. His entire body tensed. His hair fluttered as he roared, his eyes glaring. The exterminating Sun Bao in his hand radiated dazzling light. The tip of his foot touched the ground, and his body flew out like a swallow. Then, he rose his hand, placing it on the exterminating Sun Bao. The light on the longbow was dazzling. As he pulled the bow, more light arrows shot out. Boom! 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 Chun Song's arrow of light collided with the arrow of light that the Nether King had thrown back. The collision caused a violent explosion and tremor. Terrifying energy expanded from the center of the explosion. Chun Song was almost crazy, roaring unceasingly. All of a sudden, his eyes shrank. This was because he discovered that the arrow of light that was shot back was tainted with a trace of pitch-black gas. It was Nether energy. You're a creature from the netherworld. Chun Song roared. His entire body was on the verge of exploding. The exterminating Sun Bao blocked in front of him, and the light arrow smashed onto it. Chun Song coughed up a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying. His chest was pierced by the arrow, and the exterminating Sun Bao flew high into the air before landing on the ground with a thud. Chun Song staggered, his face pale. A netherworld creature. How could there be such a powerful creature? Could it be that the laws of the hidden dragon continent were all useless? What happened to stopping the living beings above the great void realm? What was going on with this terrifying existence in front of him? Chun Song looked at the big hole in his chest. His face suddenly trembled violently. His body was shaking like a sieve, and blood kept flowing out of his mouth. Black qi was infecting his wounds, preventing his true qi from healing his body. It was indeed the evil nether energy of the netherworld creatures. Chun Song's face was filled with despair. He turned around and directly fell to the ground. He opened his arms and tried to crawl forward, but it became extremely difficult. Rumble! Gloomy dark clouds gathered in the sky again. Hades' era picked up a piece of bamboo shoot wrapped in a spicy strip. Finally, he happily shoved it into his mouth. As soon as the bamboo shoot entered his mouth, it burst out instantly. The taste of the spicy strip made Hades's entire body soften. He chewed and opened his eyes. Looking at the dark clouds in the sky, the corners of his mouth twitched disdainfully. The great paths principle of the hidden dragon continent. It's like a ghost that won't go away. Nether King Erha chuckled, then retracted his aura. His whole body became ordinary, and he began to gorge on the plate of myriad living things. While eating, he nodded continuously. The other judges dropped their jaws in bewilderment. However, shortly after, they pulled themselves together. They reached out their chopsticks, picking up a piece of bamboo shoot and putting it in their mouth. The bamboo shoot was wrapped in a spicy strip. Thick vitality accompanied by essence energy surged torrentially, unceasingly attacking people's minds. They opened their mouths, and what came out of them was thick vitality. This feeling changed the faces of the people who had tasted the moonset crow's caw, which made them feel extremely sad. Exuberant vitality was the most prominent characteristic of this dish, and Bufang had vividly displayed this characteristic. Secondly, it was the taste, which was very special and different. The spring bamboo shoot was tender, and the bamboo shoot meat was fragrant. Together with the stir-fried spirit beast meat, people couldn't help but open their mouths to breathe in the spicy aroma. Because of the spicy aroma, people's mouths watered, and that delicious feeling made them unable to control themselves. They swallowed it. That spicy aroma entered their mouths, and the stimulating feeling of crossing the walls of their mouths made people's pores open, releasing hot air and vitality. The gloomy feeling was swept away. Because it was stir-fried, it still maintained the special aroma of the ingredients, which gave it a unique and excellent taste. Myriad living things. With one bite, people felt as if everything on earth was reviving. It was as if they were in a vast yellow plain, and suddenly, a spring breeze came. Tender shoots broke out from the yellow soil, and a verdant green spread across the plain. It was full of vitality. The sixth elder narrowed his eyes. His lips, which were still stained with oil, suddenly rose into an exaggerated arc. His handlebar mustache twitched unceasingly. A smile unconsciously appeared on his face. This dish could make people feel happy both physically and mentally. His entire person seemed to relax a little. The sixth elder opened his eyes. His mentality seemed to have changed because of this dish. His aura changed slightly, and it seemed like he was about to break through. Mu Qing once again clamped her legs. That abundant vitality gushed out, making Mu Qing feel as if she was running on the prairie. Endless vitality shrouded her, and her heart, which was originally sad because of the invincible moonset crow, was now filled with joy and vitality. I told you that old booze dish is delicious. Look at this taste, look at this spicy strip. It's simply invincible. Why do you still want to compete? Hades Era said as he picked up more food. Seizing the chance when the judges were immersed in their enjoyment, he quickly shoved the food into his mouth. Although the spicy strip was delicious, the other ingredients weren't bad either. Hades Era didn't care about them, just sweeping them all into his mouth. His mouth was covered with oil. He didn't look like the one who had just shot exterminating son Bao Chen Song. Exterminating son Bao Chen Song was dying. He was about to die. His body couldn't recover, as the black nether energy was eroding it unceasingly. His eyes were blurry, and his vitality was weakening. He knew he was going to die. However, he wasn't willing to die in the hands of a netherworld creature. His bow had killed so many netherworld creatures and pierced so many desperate great ethereal netherworld warriors' heads. However, he had never thought that one day he would die under his own exterminating sun bow. His own arrow killed him. Chen Song wasn't willing, but he didn't have the strength to stand up. Blood gushed, staining the exterminating sun bow. Instantly, the bow bloomed with radiance, shooting up into the sky. The radiance bloomed, projecting a phantom on the bow. It was a figure a figure carrying a giant bow on his back. That giant bow was much more intimidating than the exterminating sun bow. Its pressure was much stronger. That phantom's eyes were like lightning. He opened his mouth, letting out an ear-piercing voice. His terrifying aura swept over the entire place. "Who dares to kill my brother?" Chen Tsang glanced over with difficulty and saw the shadow. His mind trembled and blood bubbled out of his mouth. "Big brother! Save me!" Chen Tsang struggled. Hope arose in his heart. That was his big brother's clone, the clone of an existence at the half-step divine soul realm. The doppelganger that might give him hope. The clone was enraged, his voice booming like thunder. His eyes were like torches. When he saw his third brother's pitiful appearance, he was enraged. However, a moment later, a huge pitch-black palm swept across the air. There was a loud explosion. The half-step divine soul realm clone was smashed into pieces, turning into energy and dispersing. Only his angry roar was left behind. Hades' era was stuffing spicy strips into his mouth, clapping his hands. "Noisy flies affect eyes' appetite, especially when I'm eating spicy strips, so get lost." The Nether King's mouth was full of food as he mumbled. Chen Tsang fell on the ground, his face bewildered and desperate. It was the first time he felt so desperate. The hope he had just had was smashed in the next second. That feeling made Chen Tsang spit out a mouthful of blood. His head was immediately buried in the ruins, and he breathed his last. Chen Tsang, the Almighty of the Wavering Light Holy Land, the owner of the exterminating Sun Bow, was dead. At the same time, Wavering Light Holy Land. A secret room suddenly exploded. A figure carrying a giant bow on his back stormed out with disheveled hair. He let out a painful shriek. "Valley of Gluttony! Damn you, Valley of Gluttony! My third brother! You died so miserably! I'm sure I'll take revenge for you!" Boom! Another secret chamber exploded, and another figure carrying a bow on his back stormed out, his face sorrowful. The two of them roared indignantly at the same time. They took one step, shattering the void as they ran away. Heavenly secret holy land under the twinkling star compass. An old woman was walking with her walking stick. All of a sudden, her eyes focused on a dazzling star in the star compass. She exhaled gently. Her dark purple walking stick gently knocked on the ground. A moment later, a wisp of green smoke congregated behind the old woman, turning into a handsome figure. That figure was unrestrained. His shirt was open, and he was holding a black star compass. His face was lazy. "Emoluji, I have something I need you to do," said the old woman. "If you need anything, ask the capable saintess to do it. I'm lazy, so I don't want to move." Emoluji yawned, rubbing his exposed chest. "The saintess can't go. Only you can do it. Do you see the star compass? Isn't that the Valley of Gluttony that has stirred up the Holy Land recently? A lousy Valley of Gluttony's inheritance has stirred up many people in the Holy Land like fools," said Emoluji disdainfully. The old woman turned around, looking at Emoluji solemnly. "You should go to the Valley of Gluttony now. We don't want the inheritance, but I need you to bring back the person who can trigger the star compass." Emoluji was bewildered. A moment later, his eyes narrowed, light flashing in them. "Granny Emo, tell me, how should I bring him back?" "It's okay. As long as I can bring him back. I have a premonition that he could be the saintess' inner demon. If he's the inner demon, we need to kill him," said Granny Emo. Emoluji's mouth twitched. He whistled, then stepped out. The void cracked, and he flew away. "All right, for the capable saintess Her Highness. I'll have to go. I can also see the so-called inner demon of the saintess." At this moment, the entire hidden dragon royal court and all the holy lands were stirred. Chu Chongqing had bloody holes all over his body. However, since he had become an almighty, his recovery ability was strong. Although his body was full of bloody holes, he wasn't dead yet. Instead, he was slowly recovering. He walked in front of Bufang and Xiaoya, sighing softly. Xiaoya looked at him, who was covered in blood. She took a step back in fear. She looked at Bufang with a pleading look in her big eyes. Chu Chongqing turned his head to look at Bufang. He took a deep breath and said, "Owner Bu, let me borrow Xiaoya for a moment." Then, he didn't wait for Bufang's answer. He swung his arm, hugging Xiaoya. Slowly, he walked toward the exit of the Gluttony Gods building. "I want Xiaoya to inherit the Valley of Gluttony's inheritance. I can't let anyone take it away." Bufang frowned, looking at Chu Chongqing's back. A moment later, he said indifferently, "Stop. I'm going with you." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.